Okay, I think it is going, so it should be good to go.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And I'd like to welcome everybody to this hearing of the Joint Committee on Cybersecurity, Information Technology, and Biotechnology. My name is Katie Frey-Hester, and I'm the Senate Chair, along here with my co-chair, Delegate Kaiser. And I'd just like to briefly run through the agenda for today. We've got a fantastic lineup of great speakers to help educate us and dig into some critical issues facing the state. We're going to spend the first bit of our day focused on modernization, both about updating legacy systems and best practices in government, with a strong focus on the one-stop and what is going on there. We'll then shift to a brief update on what our state is doing in terms of artificial intelligence, and then move on to cybersecurity with an update on the cybersecurity centralization strategy and what we're doing at the state and local level. And we'll close down the meeting with a bit of a panel on the nexus of cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, how the growth in artificial intelligence will be affecting the playing field of cybersecurity. So that is a brief agenda. We'll go from 10 until 1 today, and really looking forward to hearing from everybody. I'd particularly like to welcome Secretary Savage to the Joint Committee, and also our state CISO, Greg Rogers, and Netta Squires, our Director of State Local Cybersecurity. And I'll introduce people as we go through the program. Chair Kaiser, would you like to add anything?
Sure. Thank you so much, Senator Hester, and thank you so much for all the work that you do and for our staff on this work and this exciting year as we've really dug into the issue of AI, but obviously keeping our eyes still on cybersecurity and how they tie in together, and obviously along with the modernization part you mentioned. But this has been an exciting year as there's just been so much for us to talk about and try to work on and help prepare our colleagues for, especially when it comes to AI and their interests in policymaking in that area. So again, thanks to everyone, and thank you, Senator Hester. It's great working with you.
I couldn't agree more, Chair Kaiser. Thank you so much. Okay, so with that, let's move on to our first panel. The panel will consist of, we'll have a kickoff by Secretary Savage, followed by a presentation by Marcy Jacobs, Deputy Secretary of DoIT. Thank you for being here today, Marcy. We then have a brief update from Patrick Frank in DLS, the Department of Legislative Services, followed by Brian Bennett, Director of Strategic Growth from Systems Automation, who will give some perspective on best practice in this area from the private sector perspective. And finally, we will have Christopher Krotzen, the Deputy Director of Financial Systems through the Comptroller's Office, mentioning kind of what's going on with their legacy system upgrade, which is, of course, is a huge undertaking. So with that, I will kick it over to Secretary Savage. Welcome.
Good morning. Thanks, everyone. And we really appreciate the opportunity to share with you the great work we've been doing at DoIT since I started in January of this year. So I want to turn it over to my team as quickly as possible. The first thing I did was bring in experts around me to ensure that we'll be successful as an organization. But I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about my priorities since coming in, as well as how we've done a little bit of reorganization. So that'll frame the experts and the team members that you hear today. So first, diving into the DoIT priorities. So it's been very clear to me from the beginning that there are 3 big things we need to focus on at DoIT. So first and foremost, we need to clarify our product and service catalog. Those of you who have been part of state government for a long time have been part of the centralization and then the decentralization, now sort of back to a centralization phase. And so there's a lot of, I see some smiles. There's a lot of confusion about, what does DoIT provide at its core and what's serviced by the agencies. And so that's something we need to bring more clarity to. It's also an opportunity to look at what is in our catalog right now, what is perhaps an obsolete technology or duplicative technology that needs to be deprecated, and then what are some new products and services that we'd like to bring online. And especially as we think about the advent of AI, that's certainly an opportunity to think about what we might add to our portfolio. So that's the first priority. The second is to mature our cybersecurity efforts. You'll hear from Greg in a moment, but there's been a lot of great work done by the Office of Security Management under DoIT, and we really want to continue to hone our strategy to address state, I think about it as concentric circles, statewide agencies, the whole of state, and then the locals. So you hear a little bit more about Greg and how we're doing that, but making sure that we're being comprehensive in all of the cybersecurity efforts and constituencies that we serve. And then the third priority, you're about to hear from Marcy Jacobs, who's the state's first Chief Digital Experience Officer. We want to introduce more product management and digital experience to the state. DoIT as an organization right now that largely provides enterprise IT. We do have oversight over MITDPs, major IT development projects. But what that means is really a fiscal role at this stage. What Marcy and I would like to do is really think about how we can partner with agencies. We both come from a digital service background. We're both accustomed to running teams that have product managers, UI, UX people, engineers, data scientists, and those are not profiles that we have at the state. So we'd like to bring those profiles into state government so that we can partner with agencies to develop various products, whether that's implementing paid family leave, looking at the overhaul of FEMAS, all of these sort of different projects. We want to be a partner to agencies in a way that we haven't previously. So if you go to the next slide, the DoIT priorities will underscore the way that we've reorganized DoIT since I started. So Melissa Lehman, who many of you know, continues to be our COO. She has all things fiscal, budget, HR, and our portfolio office. Michelle Thomas oversees the core of IT enterprise. So that's Network Maryland, Maryland First, our service desk, SaaS platforms, and data. So kind of the core enterprise services. Marcy, as I mentioned, a new role we're putting web, product, engineering, and MITDPs under her. And then Greg, who again you'll hear from, cyber operations, cyber resilience. We're building out a GRC function, which is new for the state. And then obviously state and local. So you have Netta, who oversees our local cybersecurity, and Lance Cleghorn, who's the new director of state cybersecurity. So with that, I will turn it over to Marcy. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I wanted to frame, before we get into all of these modernization efforts that we're talking about today, I wanted to frame kind of our core focus areas and how we're organizing the team to be able to accomplish them. So with that, I can turn it over to Marcy.
Savage, and good morning, everyone. As the secretary mentioned, we both come from a background of digital service. I spent about a year and a half at the White House leading the design practice for the White House team, the White House U.S. Digital Service, and then moved over to Department of Veterans Affairs and led the digital service there for about 3 years, really focusing on how do we make it easier for people to use the benefits and services that the government is offering to them. I have spent my entire career focused on human-centered design, user experience design, website redesign. So I'm incredibly excited to be in this role and to help Maryland kind of get to the next level of thinking about the people that we serve and how do we bring better digital experiences to support their needs. You can go to the next slide. So the vision for this office is really to bring that lens of user centricity and accessibility to the services that we provide. A lot of our technology right now is very much mirroring our organizational chart. We have websites that match our agency silos, we have technology that match our agency silos, but for the customer who is coming in, they are having a hard time understanding and navigating, where do I go for something? How do I access the benefits and services that I need? So the goal here is to really build experiences that are comparable to what people engage with private sector companies, as easy as Amazon, as easy as TurboTax. And how do we start to make steps in that direction? You can go to the next slide. So as Secretary Savage mentioned, there are a few different pillars in this organization. We're focused on the website experience. There are several hundred websites that we register the DNS and provide security for. And there's a lot of room for improvement, both to make these sites more user-centric, but also to make it easier to secure and manage and get analytics from all of these different sites. So that is going to be an effort that part of the team is focused on. The part that's in the middle that we'll talk about a little bit more deeply is around application and system development. So how do people transact? Our websites right now are very static. It is a lot of brochures where we are telling people information, but then to interact with the government, typically you have to go somewhere else to a platform to engage. And that can look like a few different things, and we'll get into that detail in a minute. The last pillar is really around the major IT development projects, and how do we bring this shift of product management and a lens towards product versus project to these efforts. I think this is kind of the fundamental goal of this office, is approaching technology efforts or digital efforts not from the lens of technology first, but from the lens of people first, and really understanding who are using these systems, what are the needs that they have, and what are the outcomes that we are trying to drive. And I think that has been at least inconsistent, if not missing, in some of these engagements. If we could go to the next slide. A lot of the transactions that are supported both at the federal and the state level is the submission of forms. And a lot of our forms are still on paper. I know at the federal level, only 2% of forms have been digitized. And digitized can mean a number of different things. Here we have digitizing, meaning, excuse me, it could be Adobe fillable PDFs as a digital form. We have some basic survey functionality that can make sense if we're doing very simple forms with simple backend processing. We have the one-stop platform, which I know we want to get into a little bit more. And one-stop has really been a very timely solution for helping us automate forms that were a little bit more complicated and had more of a back-end workflow complexity. We have the eGov platform, which we've used for permitting and licensing and things that are associated with collection of fees. And then there's custom development, which could be more for complex applications with a lot of back-end functionality. Someone have a question? Okay, so if we go a little bit deeper into the one-stop platform, I think people probably know the history here, that there was a company that built one-stop that filed for bankruptcy. That product was then purchased by another vendor who has continued to stabilize that platform so that we could use all of the functionality that had been developed and built. There are several hundred forms and applications that have been built on the site. We get a high volume of transactions across the site for some of these top submissions of forms. And it does give us the ability to quickly stand up a form to support our residents and to start making that move away from paper. I will say that I don't know that One Stop is the future platform for where we need to be, but it is something that has addressed a need that we have had. And we need to think really critically as we start moving into this more user-centered digital experience, what is the right answer? And how do we think about, if we are going to make a change, what is the right change that we want to make so that things become a little bit more streamlined and integrated? And then if we go to the next slide, so we have this platform, we have the one-stop platform, and we are not entirely sure if this is the right forever answer for us. So we are being very intentional about new products that we are putting on the platform, both in terms of the volume, but also the complexity and how we engineer some of those solutions. So we are working with one agency to do a small proof of concept before we make any types of commitments to say, is this the right answer for you going forward? The issue that I see with a number of our platforms is that we have our websites where you learn about a service or a benefit or a permit or a license, and then you have to go to another location to actually transact. And the more we can integrate and not potentially lose people in that handoff or in that shift from the website to the platform, there's a real benefit there. I also want to think about, I mentioned earlier how our organizational chart is kind of manifested in technology, in websites, but also in the systems. But our users don't align with, I only interact with this agency or that agency. Many of our constituents will interact across agencies. So how do we look from more of the outside in, the user perspective, to think about where there is overlap and where there is the ability to reduce redundancy for things like login credentials, which might be different for labor and Department of Transportation and MD Think and One Stop. They may all have a different way of authenticating and then using services and then seeing the status of your services. One thing that we developed when I was at the Department of Veterans Affairs was a my account functionality that really aggregated information, whether it was from the Benefits Administration, the Health Administration, or the Cemetery Administration. It allowed veterans to go in and see in a very simple, streamlined format, your next doctor's appointment is on Tuesday and your prescription refill has been called in and we're still waiting on this document for your claim. So thinking about where we're headed, what back-end technologies are going to allow us to move more in that direction. So there's still a lot of things that we are figuring out, but that is kind of just laying out the path. I've been here for not quite 3 months, but laying out the initial thinking on where we're headed with the different technologies that this office is supporting. And I'll pause if there are any questions before we turn it over. I see a hand up.
Yes, this is Delegate Kaiser. I do have a question for you.
Sure.
And maybe this also requires a longer conversation. I was taking some notes. So on one slide, you mentioned intuitive digital experiences. As a consumer of some state services, I was on one of the other, a different state website, and I found it confounding. The click here, click there challenge, and that, click here for the application, and then you don't get the application. And I was just like, this is happening to me. I end up calling the government relations person and saying, help me out here. Why can't I do this? And so, but I feel like that's throughout the government. So when you talk about that, like, what is the work plan? I mean, that's the first part of my question. Like, what's the work plan to figure out how all the state websites and all the different forms and things, like, what's the plan?
That is a very big question, and I'm happy to have a follow-up meeting, but at a super high level, the first phase of this is a little bit opportunistic. We are working with agencies that have come to DoIT and said, we want to rebuild our site or move our site to DoIT hosting. And we are coming back to them and saying, we are happy to pick up your site and move it into our SharePoint or WordPress environment. but we can also work with you in a totally new way to help you understand, do some discovery, understand who your users are, what they are coming to do, what is your most used content, what content needs to be retired. There are agencies that have thousands of PDFs from the mid-90s. Like, let's actually think about content governance and think about, is all of this content still needed, or is it getting in the way of people finding what they're looking for today? And also, what are the gaps in content? What are the calls that agencies are getting repeatedly that we could potentially answer in more effective ways? When we think about the number of sites that we have, the hundreds of sites that we have, it is a lot of agencies telling constituents what they do and who they are, as opposed to agencies really listening and responding to what are the tasks that constituents need to accomplish. And your point, Delegate Kaiser, about here's the information about the thing and here's the link to go to the application, which doesn't actually take you to the application. There are so many kind of points where people can get lost. And if you are working with populations who are trying to navigate starting a business, getting access to a critical benefit or service, those choke points, I think, in addition to the drop-off, it also impacts overall trust in government. It impacts people's feeling of, this was designed for me, and this is something where I can navigate. The fact that you know who to reach out to and you know who to ask when you get stuck, you are the super user, but most of our constituents have no idea. And they should not need to know how Maryland government is organized and structured to be able to find the thing that they have access to. So it is making that shift, and it will be some of these initial sites focusing on content, focusing on site architecture, and using that to inform what should our backend platform be. I don't think that either of the platforms we have right now are our forever solution in terms of SharePoint or WordPress. What are the gaps and problems?
Well, I wanted to interrupt, and I guess that will be part of our later conversation. I want a sense of, like, what's the goal? We're going to clean up so many websites at a time. We're going to clean up so many applications and so forth. But I can hold that till later, but I want some sense of, like, what the goals are for the next few years. The other point I wanted to make, you mentioned about prioritizing needs of constituents and that the websites needed to do that. So I'm certainly curious if you'll actually be working with constituents to answer those questions. And I guess I just want to add one other thing that's related, and I don't know whose responsibility it is, but it's all of our state websites have, and maybe not all, many of our state websites have very old listings of who actually works there. So again, anyone going onto the website to find people. And it seems like that's the simplest fix, because that actually doesn't require new pages and new interfaces and new PDFs and new forms. Just updating the websites, updating the Maryland manual, actually finding people who work at given agencies. And I don't know whose job that is, but to me, that's a major choke point, and it's kind of embarrassing. That
Heather, if I might, I think that's an excellent point. And going back to my comments in the beginning of the presentation, this is exactly the problem with the centralization and then the decentralization. So right now, agencies are responsible for their own content. So all DoIT's responsibility is right now is to facilitate the contract, and it's clearly not working. Either agencies don't have. So one of the things that also surprised me when I came into the role is the web development is entirely outsourced. So what should be a simple update this website, you would not believe we essentially have to issue a task order to make a simple fix. And because the content is managed by the agencies, they have to flag that they want a content change, which comes to us. We issue a task order, goes to the contractors, which is ridiculous in this era of low code, no code. So that's exactly the type of thing that we're trying to dive in on with Marcy, is to say, like, one, let's bring the talent in house, and let's figure out how to reduce so many hops so that we can just do this sort of quick updating. Because I absolutely take your point, because it shouldn't be as challenging as it is right now.
All right. Thank you.
I'd like to just jump in and remind everyone that we have 3 more speakers in this hour, of which we have 34 minutes left. And so my suggestion is that we move on, and I think there does need to be, several more conversations. And if I could park them on the record for future conversations, I'm personally concerned about the movement of all MDE permits to One Stop. I have yet to get a good answer from MDE about why One Stop is indeed the right place. And I'm very heartened to hear Marcy talk about, how the user-centric approach and the goals for where she wants to go and how we're going to think critically. And so I just encourage us to think critically about MDE to make sure we're making the right decision. I also wanted to point out that I believe that there's customer feedback that is enabled on the One Stop for like the businesses. But there isn't any way for a customer on the One Stop for government services to provide feedback. That's at least what I've heard. So we'll park those for later. And let us move on to Patrick Frank, who had a quick overview from the Department of Legislative Services.
If I could, while we're transitioning, just to speak to the MDE point, we're not transitioning all of their services to it. They have they're doing one permit as a pilot with us right now. But to Marcy's point, we don't know that this is the forever solution. So that's definitely not a settled question.
That's not what they told me. So I'm really glad to hear that, Secretary Savage.
Yeah, we can follow up on that.
Okay. Patrick Frank.
Okay, yes, I was asked to give a quick update on the spending that has been made available to the One Stop program. I have a short presentation. I will skip most of the first page since it's information that's already been covered. I will just point out also that in my spending data, on the third bullet, I also mention that the Department of Natural Resources has its own one-stop integration project, whereas the other DoIT projects are for statewide and cover all the agencies. But there is one, and that included modernization because the back end wasn't good enough to use for One Stop. And so I did think that this was relevant for you to be aware of that particular project and that spending. And on my second page here on this presentation, as you can see, the spending has been about $50 million from 2019 to 2024 that has been made available. The light blue bars at the bottom represent the statewide program, and the red is DNR's modernization and their one-stop integration. And so the state has made a very large commitment. I think the concern at the time has been raised by other issues, is that the state really has a lot of silos that information is in. And part of what One Stop was really the first real statewide attempt to break a lot of that stuff down and to make it easier for people to move across and to find the information electronically. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks.
If I can just make one small clarification on this slide with regard to DNR. DNR was working with the previous vendor, transitioned to the new vendor when EY took over the platform, but they are not staying on One Stop. They have an RFP that has gone out. They are working that has been awarded. They're working with a new contractor, and they are not using the platform going forward. So some of these red bars, I think for 23 and 24, are not representative of actual work that is going on the platform.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. If you could get back to us with the fiscal year with which they transitioned off the platform, that would be fabulous.
I think that they still have some of their functionality that was built on the platform is staying, but they are not doing any new development on the platform. They're not rebuilding things that were previously built, but they're not adding to what they have on One Stop.
So maybe you and Patrick can have a conversation offline, because my understanding is this is historical. And so we can just clarify when the transition occurred. That would be great.
Yep,
Let's move on then to our, we have one private sector company, which has some best practices from outside the, based on their outside experience. So I'd like to ask Brian Bennett or Nick Cook, whoever is going to start off, to give us their views. And then we are going to try to hold any additional questions for Patrick or for Brian and Nick, and also for Christopher until the end, just so we make sure we make it through everybody's presentation. Thanks.
No problem. Thanks everyone for having us here this morning. I'll just kind of jump into it. I'm kind of sharing my screen here. Just a real quick agenda. We're going to talk about who System Automation is for those who don't know who we are. We're also going to speak to kind of those the one-stop as well as in-biz experiences as far as that whole idea of having the goal of a statewide one site to serve all constituents, and then certainly we'll have some time for Q&A. So with that said, my name is Brian Bennett. I'm the Director of Strategic Growth for System Automation, and I also have Nick Cook here. Nick?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Nick Cook, Vice President of Operations. Thank you for the time today. And I'll get us kicked off. As Brian said, we want to introduce System Automation to those of you that may not be familiar with who we are. We are a Maryland-based company. We're headquartered in Columbia, Maryland, and have been since our founding in 1968. So we've been in business for 55 years now. And we are a software manufacturer, specifically for professional licensing, permitting, regulatory management type solutions. We have been focused on that particular domain for about 30 years now. Going back to the 60s, we held a contract with the Pentagon. We built the Army's first recruitment and retention system. At our core, we've always existed to serve government, and in the last 30 or so years, focused on software to serve government, and more narrowly in state and local government. You can see on the next slide that, you know, while we are a Maryland-based company, we actually got our beginnings here in Maryland. We've have experience all across the country, and that's what we're really here to share with you all today, is to share some lessons learned and best practices that we've gleaned from our experience supporting other agencies across the country that we'd love to see, you know, kind of be folded into the process here in our home state. Our products are being used to serve, you know, 500 agencies across the country, supporting nearly 800 professions and 5,000 license types. So professional licensing, occupational licensing is our sweet spot. That is all that we do. And I also just want to make clear too, we are not a one-stop vendor. We're not, you know, we have no intention of developing a one-stop. We don't, we haven't built one, but we have had the good fortune through the experience across the country that you see here of working with other agencies and or firms that do. And we've integrated with some as well. And that's principally what we're here to share today, is just talk about our experience in that regard. And as you can see on this slide here, a lot of our experience, it really runs the gamut from individual boards or agencies that might just be a board of accountancy, for example, to true large enterprise statewide licensing implementations, agencies that regulate north of 500 different license types and hundreds of thousands of licensees. So you can see just a sampling of the experience in Indiana, New Jersey, New Hampshire, and Utah. And I'll give a light touch to all of this, knowing that we are short on time, but just wanted to kind of give some context to our background and kind of our experience as it's germane to the One Stop here in Maryland. And of course, as I noted, we did get our humble beginnings here in the state of Maryland. We're very proud to continue supporting our home state. You can see here the agencies that we support: the Board of Nursing, State Police, Occupational Therapy, Dental Examiners, Pharmacy, and the Department of Labor are all existing customers today. And so, as I noted, we're not here to talk about how we could do the one-stop better. That's not our business. That's not what we do. But we have had some really good experiences integrating with another one-stop. And the one that we plan to highlight today is a product called InBiz. It's the Indiana one-stop interface. And that was run out of the Secretary of State's office. That's not our customer. It's just a different agency that interfaced with our customer. And we worked collaboratively with them to create a really elegant, seamless experience for the Hoosiers in the state of Indiana, the constituents that they serve. So we wanted to kind of just take a moment to just point out some of the challenges and the constraints that exist within what we see in the One Stop today here in Maryland, offer some suggestions, and principally our message is that we stand ready to help. Any insight that we can offer, any support we can offer as it relates to evolving this vision of the One Stop, which, by the way, we believe is a laudable vision. We definitely support the idea of having a single pane of glass, one login to interact with all agencies within the state, obfuscating from the citizen all of the different complexities that underlie government. So Brian, with that, I guess I'll turn it over to you and let you talk about our experience.
For sure. Thanks, Nick. And so we have the pleasure of presenting to the committee just over 2 years ago. So there's a recording of that as far as presenting kind of our experience and whatnot. So we're excited to be back here. And I just wanted to point out, you know, it's great to hear from Secretary Savage and Marcy in regards to kind of where things are at with DoIT, because it's kind of no wonder there's kind of these currently a not ideal experience, right? When other states have experienced this, where there's centralization, then there's decentralization, then there's centralization again. It's like an accordion, right? And so then over time, it's no wonder that you have lots of different agencies with lots of different systems, some new, some old, and whatnot, which really doesn't play well when it comes to having that overall ideal digital experience. So, you know, currently, case in point, for instance, if I was in Maryland and wanted to become a chiropractor, I mean, it's one of those things where we go to the one-stop site and then navigate to that page, click apply now, and then that whole idea of going to another page with different links, and yeah, that can be confusing. And then it comes to a PDF form, which there is inconsistencies and whatnot. And what do people do next as far as those application forms and whatnot? Another example is for those who want to be a CPA in the state, right? Again, we start off at one stop. They have to confirm different requirements as far as do they meet these things. They can download this form, and then they're sent to the Department of Labor page. And there's a lot of different explanations, so it does get confusing. And after they confirm that they've passed the exams, they click on another link and it goes to a page. And so that errors out, which is unfortunate. But again, we definitely appreciate the state's goals as far as really providing that one-stop and shop and really improving that digital experience and modernizing. So then instead of PDF forms and whatnot, having that truly intuitive experience as a goal is definitely commendable. And like Nick said, we are here to help, and he's going to explain a little bit about our experience in Indiana.
Thanks, Brian. So yeah, so this is just kind of one page that has a few different views just to kind of contrast the user experience from a citizen's perspective, right? So the screens that you see here are actually not one single application. I think the beauty and really the crux of why InBiz was as successful as it was that there was a tremendous amount of really tight integration with the agency partners, leveraging the technology that already existed within those agencies, not kind of taking it over, and finding ways to integrate in such a way that you create a truly seamless experience. So, you know, if you're just a citizen coming in to apply for a license, or take the CPA as an example, and you see all these screens, it's completely transparent to you that you're actually interacting with many different agencies under the hood, because the user experience, the digital experience that was created is very seamless from one exchange to the other. And that resulted in, you know, really high customer satisfaction, really also helped to decrease time to licensure. So for those that are saying opening a business in the state that have to also obtain licenses, they're able to do that through one pane of glass, make one payment in the shopping cart that you see on the bottom right there. And it really makes it feel like it's easy to open up a business and get the licenses that I need in the state of Indiana. You know, we want that same experience for our home state here and fellow citizens here in the state of Maryland. And so really from a before and after perspective, Indiana was in much the same state that we find ourselves in with many of our agencies today. Brian, if you're able to advance. So you know, they had websites that were kind of, you know, transferring users to individual agency forms. There were kind of bulk data transfers between the systems, but it wasn't really tightly integrated such that it was real time. So it wasn't always clear if the citizens were seeing the most up-to-date data. You had duplicate data entry, processing duplicate payments. I can assure you many of our customers, the calls that they get are, well, I already paid, why do I have to pay again? Or they feel like they were charged twice. Like, these are things that create a lot of friction between the agencies and the citizens of the state. And that's principally what I think this vision of a one-stop is intended to eliminate. We'd be remiss if we didn't also note the change management aspect associated with this. Human beings are resistant to change, right? And so I think when you engage in a project of this scale, It's important that we engage with the agency partners, that they understand that they won't, quote unquote, lose control of certain things that they feel like they should retain control over, which the business logic being, chief among them. And through that approach, which, by the way, is the confluence of people, process, and technology, I want to be very clear that this is not a technology problem alone. In fact, technology is importantly the last one in that list, because I think if you just come and throw the hammer, assuming it's a nail, and you're going to fail every time, right? I mean, the people and process really have to be first in an effort of this magnitude, and then you leverage the best of breed technologies that are already available to you or integrate new ones. And in biz, they were able to do that, create the experience I just showed you. The agency retained control of their business logic. Their central IT shop, they call it IoT, still had a partnership role to play in all of that. And it was kind of everybody was playing very nicely in the sandbox, I guess is kind of how I would describe it. And more to the point, all of this was achieved on a very modest budget. That integration alone with the Indiana Professional Licensing Agency was accomplished with $3 million. The Indiana Professional Licensing Agency regulates 450 license types. So they're essentially the equivalent of MDH plus Maryland Department of Labor combined. So they already had a lot of centralization organizationally that they benefited from, because it all kind of falls under the purview of one commissioner and one sort of governance structure. I know that we're more fragmented as a state in that regard, but that allowed them to realize a lot of economies of scale. And I know we're getting close to time, so and I know we have another speaker, so I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cook. I really appreciate yours and Mr. Bennett's, willingness to help the state. I think that, one of the things that I'm hearing, is that from this new administration and the new DoIT team that Secretary Savage has brought in, there is a strong desire to change. So I really applaud DoIT. And I've got to say that, in a federated system, it's hard for DoIT to make change, right? So I think one of the things that would be helpful from the DoIT team would be to, be clear kind of how the state legislature can help you and move this forward faster. Chair Kaiser wants a timeline and a strategy. So how can we help you do that? And we've got amazing, vendors in the state like System Automation and many others who are willing to help. So how best can they engage with you? With that said, we're going to hold any questions for Mr. Cook until the end, and I'm going to turn it over to Rob O'Connor with the Comptroller's Office to give us an update on their major modernization project. Over to you. We can't hear you yet. Now it looks muted.
Headset and platform not working together.
Now we hear you. Welcome.
I know. Gotta love technology. Okay. So I just want to actually introduce Chris Kratzen, who is going to be leading this initiative for the financial system upgrade. As Senator Hester said earlier, this is an enormous project. This is actually one of our several enormous projects, as we're also in the middle of upgrading our integrated tax system. There is a lot in motion already, and I am going to turn it over to Chris because he has the full presentation. Chris?
Thank you very much, Rob, and Madam Chairs and committee members, thank you. There's a lot that we have to be grateful for already, so we appreciate your support in passing the bill in the legislature this past session, as well as the funding, because as I'm going to lead in, that is going to be the keystone governance for this initiative moving forward. So really, thank you for your support and efforts thus far. I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully that comes through.
Yes. You're good, Chris.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So really, Mr. Cook actually just provided me the perfect segue coming into this, because really where we are is I'm going to show a project overview here, but really we're in the beginning stages of this endeavor. I couldn't stress more that this is not a system implementation, but rather a business transformation. So where we are right now is defining the planning and strategy for this modernization of our famous financial ERP system in the state of Maryland. That touches every agency in the state. It holds our general ledger, reporting, and subordinate subledger processes that come into it. The current system that we have is 30 years old. There's interfacing systems and disaggregated processes. So really that brings us back to what Mr. Cook said, when you take people, processes, and systems. Really our goal for this initiative, looking forward and envisioning the future state, is to understand how we're going to need to affect the business transformation, then lay on the new technology to that, and that's statewide. So to accomplish that, that's really our goal. We have already formulated the approach, as you see on the screen, in terms of several phases for this modernization project. We are currently in phase 1, which will include the planning and strategy for the enterprise. That will include the organizational scan. We're really developing 2 channels, which is the technological channel, which will be ultimately the system development, and then the business transformation channel, which is going to be really affecting the people and processes. To that end, one of our initial key wins this past period was we have onboarded 2 leads and my senior leadership. One of those is Dr. Victoria Steger, who we target to stand up a Maryland Accounting Academy within the state to elevate the people, the skill set already. That's a near-term item we're looking for to start delivering on business transformation. So as we look forward in this project, in phase 1, we're developing our plan and strategy. We're looking at the business transformation aspects, and then we're looking at the functional aspects. We also target to do a scan of the organization to understand current state, which will help us build our requirements and launch us into phase 2, which is where we will be looking at performing the solicitations and the procurement to get our ultimate tool and technology to implement within the business in phase 3. So that is a long journey. We don't have a defined macro timeline. We have estimates. We're in a micro state right now in phase 1 to phase 2 in the next fiscal years. And with that, I will move into the submitted questions. I'm looking at my time, so I'm going to really keep this high level as we move through. As I know, Madam Chair, you want to open up to questions at the end. So the update, I just gave the update on the FEMAS project, and the goals for this system is to really create a modernized, single modern cloud-based financial system for the state of Maryland. In addition to that, is also creating simplified business functions and processes, as well as a unified data strategy. Those are going to be absolutely paramount to the operation of a unified system and will help us get data out of that system quicker, cleaner, and more efficient. I touched on the timelines for the implementation. Right now, we're in phase 1 of the project. We look to move into phase 2 by the end of this fiscal year. As we onboard a PMO service, as we go towards developing that industry-leading PMO to help us through this, as did in other states, we will have a redefined timeline. And as we understand what services and what software we're looking at, that will also define the timeline as we move forward. I was really happy to see the lessons we've learned from other big state projects, because those are paramount here. And it brings us back to OCM, Organizational Change Management. There's a couple things here I'm going to touch on. One is the absolute need for appropriate and effective OCM within the project. When I say that is, oftentimes OCM is brought on in the middle or the end of the project, and it often leads to project failure in a lot of cases. We are looking at this right now. As I mentioned, we brought on Dr. Victoria Steger, whose background is in OCM, as well as she stood up the Maryland Procurement Academy. She is a former CLO, Chief Learning Officer at DGS. So she has industry and state experience. She is currently working on an OCM strategy in phase 1 of the project and working on developing our accounting academy for all fiscal personnel in the state. So we're really attacking that OCM early. In addition, one of the things we've seen in other states is a procurement strategy. So the procurement strategy is going to be very important as we plan and lead into phase 2 to make sure we're getting the right vendor or vendors in terms of the software solution and the implementers to ensure that there isn't vendor lock-in, to make sure that we're able to drive to quality deliverables and value assurance to the to this expansive project. In terms of customer experience, which is absolutely paramount to our end users and stakeholders of the state of Maryland, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Victoria Steger to give some background on that.
Good morning. Good morning to the committee, Madam Chairs. Thank you, Chris. I've been here less than a month. I've been here 3 weeks, so I'm still developing that. So Marcy Jacobs, when you were talking, I got to tell you, I was just nodding my head. I don't know if you saw me, but I am focused on the people and the process. And so a couple of things on customer service. You got to identify and know your customers. And that comes back to the design of it. One of the things that we have to do is look at how are we proactive with it, and that really comes more into the user experience in the system. But we also have to make sure our users are ready for that system, and that's one of our big concerns, that they are prepared to move from a 30-year-old system to a brand new interactive user experience that is asks different things from them. So we're going to empower them. We're going to make sure that they understand it, that they're a part of the design and the development and the requirements, and that we have two-way communication throughout the project. That will be starting very, very soon. And the last thing is it's data-driven decision-making. We are not going to just make a decision because it's cool and sexy. We need to make sure it's the right thing to do, and it's the best thing to do for the state and for our end users. So we're going to identify our users, we're going to involve our users, and we're going to be very proactively empowering them. And lastly, we're going to listen to them, gather data, and continuously improve. So that's a high level in 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Victoria. I know that there's a lot behind that as well. And I'm being very conscious of time. So I'm going to skip down to the last point, which is there a mechanism for making sure the problems with other state IT problems and systems does not happen with FEMA's? I want to key in on this because one of the things we are very conscious of and excited about is the governance that was passed in the legislature last year. That kind of forms our pinnacle of the pyramid. From that, we have the cooperative agencies to be able to set policy, to be able to set direction and strategy of this expansive project across state agencies and moving forward. In addition, we'll have supportive PMO office that we are looking to bring in industry leading services that have done this in other states, as well as our internal leadership to be able to have steering committees that really are going to be made of subject matter experts across the agencies. We need to focus on the fact that there are multitude of end users, and we keep that in mind. And I think that is going to enable us to have success as we continue to focus moving forward, as well as the OCM and business transformation. With that, I see there is 5 minutes left, and I would like to turn it over to any questions. And however, Madam Chairs, you want to move forward.
Thank you. Really appreciate you guys being here and applaud the major progress that you've made, you know, in the past year, really. The comptroller's office is to be commended. My screen's blank. I just want to check. Can you guys hear and see me?
We can hear you.
We can at least hear you.
Okay, I have no idea what's going on.
I can hear and see you.
Oh, fabulous. So I wanted to open it up for questions for any of our previous speakers. So any questions for the comptroller's office, any questions for system automation, any questions for Patrick Frank. And I will do my best to see if hands are raised. And just to the comptroller's office, I'd be curious if you're willing to follow up with us offline with the questions that we asked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Particularly, we skipped over the one about how you're going to stay on time and budget. I'd love to know in writing the answer to that question.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I am not. Oh, wait, I see Chair Kaiser has her hand up.
Thank you, Chair Hester. I guess I'd follow up with your comment to the comptroller's office, not just on budget, but what is the budget? And again, we can get this later, but how much of that is being requested in this year's budget? Because that's if things actually happen. My questions actually are for system automation. I want to go back. I was listening to what you described and what you described with the Indiana comparison, and I believe you said that beforehand they were much like Maryland. I'm not sure if you mentioned the cost and if you can also give us any sense of what put it high on the agenda. I mean, we all need these things in every state to actually happen, but what made it actually happen?
Well, I think it was definitely a top-down thing. So this initiative was principally driven by the Secretary of State's office. And so the Secretary of State worked very closely with the agency head at the professional licensing agency. They kind of got bought in at the top, and then they said, listen, this is going to be on the priority list for us to achieve. The PLA has a very strong IT leadership within its organization as well, works very closely with the central state IT. And they roadmap out for years to come, and it just became a priority of theirs such that it became a priority of ours to support them in as they perform this integration.
And do you know how much it all costs?
I don't know the entirety of all of the InBiz integrations. I do know that for our piece where they integrated with the professional licensing agency totaling 450 license types, it was on the order of $3 million. And that wasn't, again, this was multi-vendor, multi-agency. That wasn't just what System Automation earned. That was the totality of it.
Was that $3 million a year or $3 million cumulative?
That was a one-time implementation cost to get everything integrated associated with it. There were no ongoing, at least not from our perspective, maintenance fees that came with that, because they're just continuing to use our products as they were for licensure.
That seems well more affordable than I would have imagined. Thank you.
Sure.
Can anybody on the call speak to the self-funded contract that's going on before BPW right now? Because it seems like if there's no ongoing fees with what Mr. Cook just mentioned, it must be similar to the self-funded contract before BPW today.
I'm not sure what the question is in terms of specific details. The contract, I think, did get bumped from BPW today's agenda.
Okay,
so specific questions.
Yeah, and we can talk about it when we follow when we follow up with our future meeting. My understanding is that there's ongoing costs with One Stop. Like you pay for it and then you keep paying for it annually. There are other models of contracts which are self-funded. And it seems like what Mr. Cook presented must be one of those self-funded, but I could be wrong. But if we could get a comparison in terms of, you know, the cost and the model for One Stop versus, you know, other contracts which fall into that kind of the self-funded category, I would like to understand that better.
Yeah, we definitely can lay that out. I think there are trade-offs and different intentions for the two different contracts, but I do just want to make the point that any technology investment should have continuous investment over time. It's not a build something and then it's never done. Or it becomes, the next round of legacy things that we'll have to replace in a few years.
Understood. I think we're just trying to.
Yeah.
I just want to say again, I really appreciate the fresh look that you, Ms. Jacobs, and Secretary Savage's office as a whole is taking. Really appreciate the willingness to look under the cover and to answer some of these questions that this committee has been asking for years. Really, it's nice to have a partner. Are there other questions before we move on to the next section? Great. Well, I'd like to thank everybody who was able to join us and share their expertise for the first hour. Really very much appreciated. And as always, if members have additional questions, we'll be doing some follow-up. So please send questions to committee staff and we'll make sure to try to get answers to those. I'm just moving back to my agenda. Give me 1 second, please. So I believe next up is the topic of artificial intelligence. Many of you will have seen part of our 6-hour marathon hearing a month ago on artificial intelligence. At that point, we really focused on trying to educate the committee with a variety of outside perspectives. And today I'm delighted that we have our internal perspective ready to share. We've invited Secretary Savage and our new senior advisor for artificial intelligence, Nishant Shah, to join us today. And so I'd just like to turn it over to which one of you is starting. Both of you, really appreciate your willingness to be here and give us an update on what you all are thinking when it comes to responsible AI.
Sure, I'm happy to kick things off and turn it over to Nishant. So, most of you know I came from DoD, where I was dual-hatted running the Defense Digital Service and also a Deputy Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer in the newly created office there in the Secretary of Defense office. I'm really passionate about this area, and I think Nishant has done an incredible job balancing what we're calling responsible use with productive use. So the responsible use being how we're thinking about governance and ethics and accountability and bias, and then the productive use, really drilling into real use cases. How do we operationalize it in a way that helps the governor and the state agencies achieve their objectives on behalf of Marylanders? So Nishant will get into that today, but wanted to set the stage that, as we dive into this work, we're trying to be lockstep with what the Biden administration is doing. We're convening other states to make sure that, we're not recreating something that's already been done. And also we're in a community of people that are sharing best practices. But you'll hear today that we're balancing, again, the responsible side with the productive side. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nishant to talk a little bit about his personal background and then the work that he's been doing.
Thank you, Secretary Savage. Appreciate that introduction. So as the Secretary mentioned, I'll be speaking a little bit today about how we're thinking about our next steps on AI and the types of initiatives that we're planning on pushing forward in the coming months. Just a little bit to my background prior to jumping in there, by way of a quick intro, my background is a mix of product, AI, and policy. I came from Meta's responsible AI team, where I was a product leader focused on AI governance. What might that look like in terms of governing the models that Meta uses across 3 billion users? And prior to that, at Amazon and the White House during the Obama administration, along with a number of startups and nonprofits in South Asia and Africa. And so, I'm super excited about this work and super passionate about it. It's what I've spent the last whole bunch of years on, and I'm excited to be doing so at the state. Next slide. So over the last few months, and the Secretary spoke a little bit to this, we've really asked ourselves 2 major questions just to set the stage here. First, what set of sort of catalyzing foundational work is needed to ensure that the state's use of AI is A, responsible, so we first do no harm, and B, productive, so we're really leaning in and delivering our residents the potential benefits of AI. And second, how might we chart a path forward that does a few different things simultaneously, that builds momentum on these efforts quickly, that coheres approaches across agencies, given our very decentralized, federated IT model, and yet maintains flexibility in our methods so that we can adapt them to changes in capabilities and emerging best practices. And, given sort of the rapid uptake of AI tools across society and eventually in state government, and sort of the exponential evolution of the set of technologies, in addition to the real risks and the real opportunities that it presents, we see this as just urgently important to get good answers to these questions and to start down this road quickly. Next slide. So to chart our path here, we've been engaging deeply with the broader community to ensure that we're moving in the right direction, both now and in the future. That means a few different things. We've been drawing upon published and emerging research and guidance, which includes documents like the Federal AI Executive Order, NIST Risk Management Framework, the AI Bill of Rights, a variety of others from civil society groups and regulatory bodies abroad. We believe in leveraging the good work that is happening in the broader community. So we'll stay up to date on key bodies' recommendations here, incorporate that with our own work. And I'll note that a lot of these recommendations are evolving quite quickly. And so, we'll have to keep a finger on the pulse there. We've also been seeking input from external academic and industry and civil society experts. Essentially, this is where most of the expertise lives at the moment. And I'll get to that in a little bit more depth further in the presentation. And, we've been discussing approaches with other states that are solving the same problems that we are, so that we don't end up reinventing the wheel 50 different times in 50 different states. So to that end, I'm working with a few other AI advisors from other states, and we're kicking off a community of practice of sorts to ensure that we're sort of exchanging best practices here and helping each other with this work. And finally, we've been engaging with leaders across Maryland agencies to understand how they're thinking about AI and how we might collaborate. One data point here is there was a survey that DoIT ran over the summer about current AI use at agencies, and that survey had, pretty limited responses, so it wasn't whole of government, but it was useful as a sort of finger in the wind. The takeaway there is that generally, outside of a handful of use cases, there's been very little AI use so far, and anticipated use cases, at least as reported by that survey, hewed to pretty similar themes, chatbots, office productivity. And what that sort of conveys is that we'll need to spend some time, I think, helping agencies understand the art of the possible here. So that'll be part of the work that we do in the coming months as well. It also became clear that agencies generally want three things as soon as possible. One is sort of clear guardrails and Gen AI guidance. Another is a clear approach to procuring AI tools. And then also help with use case identification and piloting. And I'll get a little bit more to that soon as well. And finally, that the experience of doing that survey sort of underlined the need for a more formal AI inventory that's representative of all agencies' AI use. And I'll be speaking a little bit more to that soon as well. Next slide. So just taking a quick step back, all the groundwork that I've just talked about has informed a set of initiatives that we believe are foundational to the state's safe adoption of AI. And these are still in flux. We're working on details around how best to move them forward, but I'll speak here to how we're thinking about them and what we believe these initiatives should be. I noted in the key questions sort of slide that our focus is on responsible and on productive use. So I'll start with the responsible side first, which essentially means getting a governance framework in place. So the first step here will be really getting in place some set of state AI principles and values. These would comprehensively underpin the state of Maryland's use of AI moving forward. And it could be based on guidance like the AI Bill of Rights, NIST's AI Risk Management Framework, as well as incorporating a number of Maryland-specific values here. You can think about this sort of as our North Star that we'd use when making decisions on what to adopt or what not to, and how to actually know if any harm is coming from our use of AI. And so we're working on finalizing this set of values in the coming weeks. The second thing on here is, we'll need to issue guidance around state employees' use of generative AI in particular. And, that means the do's, the don'ts, the best practices and use of tools like ChatGPT and others. It'll all have to trace back to the values that we set. And, based on those values, what should we adopt and what shouldn't we? we're anticipating this guidance would be structured as a living document of sorts that's updated on some regular cadence, given that the rapid changes in generative AI technologies and products and capabilities, it's all moving very fast and we don't know what we don't know. So we'll have to have some sort of formalized process to maybe every quarter or some other cadence sort of revisit and come up with guidelines there. The third thing on here is, we'll need to figure out, and what we started doing is how to actually operationalize each adopted AI value and structure that as a timelined action plan. So there's lots of emerging guidance on what the actions could look like, but much less on the how, particularly for government entities, that primarily procure rather than build AI models. I was on Meta's responsible AI team prior to joining the state, and I can tell you that this is very much the hard part, and where the devil's in the details. So we'd see this action plan, as a comprehensive roadmap towards the state's efforts to build out guardrails, and it would probably take a sort of phased crawl, walk, run sort of approach in order to stay flexible to changes in the technology and governance best practices as they're created and as other institutions build those out. Number 4 here is, we'll need to get an inventory of the state's AI assets in place. So there's clear oversight mechanisms. The point I would want to make here is that, the key here is going to be to make the inventory usable and comprehensive and not just a set of PDFs that collects dust. So that includes, sets of metadata that come from models and use. Imagine a future 10 years from now where a much greater percentage of our software is underpinned by AI. We'll need very different mechanisms, and that inventory will look very different than just a set of use cases that are, on a piece of paper right now. Number 5 on here, we're also working sort of on figuring out the procurement side of things. The frame we're taking here is, what's the right path of establishing processes, policies, standards, contracts, playbooks that ensure that any AI tools procured by the state adhere to the set of AI values that we've adopted. The longer term path here, I think, could be outlined in the action plan that I mentioned. But in parallel, we'll need to create sort of an initial, more lightweight approach that connects very deeply to our intake process. And, there's already some good examples out there on different states and cities that have adopted elements of this. So I think engaging with other folks who've started gaining some experience here will be important. And there's also a number of third parties that we've started interacting with that study AI governance in public sector institutions with a focus on procurement. So I think taking lessons learned from those folks will be really important as well. Number 6 here is, risk assessments, audits, and continuous monitoring. These are key governance artifacts to operationalize the values that I mentioned and to ensure essentially that, those values stay true over the life cycle of an AI tool's use. We can do a set of measurements and maybe they're abiding by that set of values upon intake and upon procurement. But is that true a year down the line? Is that true 2 years down the line? We need a set of tools in place that ensures that we have some sort of mechanism to monitor that. And then finally, deep dives and recommendations in critical domains. So, certain critical domains intersecting with AI carry particularly great risk or opportunity. And those will require deeper sort of near-term Maryland-specific study along with external experts. And that set of results that comes from that deeper study and set of recommendations should be provided to the legislature and to the governor, recommending what should happen next based on that study. And so, excuse me, the fulsome list there still needs to be identified, but it could include, excuse me, elections, security, workforce development, economic development, climate. There's a number of others that we're sort of workshopping and thinking through, but a super sort of important undertaking. Next slide. So of course, we're doing all of this because we believe the upside potential of AI is truly significant. And that's what this slide means by productive use. Getting the infrastructure, the processes, the know-how in place to build our AI muscle and get good at leveraging AI. So the first thing on here is, the best way to learn is by doing. And so we intend to run a variety of AI proofs of concept and pilots. And by a proof of concept here, we mean some short-term experiment, maybe 3 months to 6 months. We set a set of success metrics, we know exactly what we're measuring, and we see if the tool or the general technology has utility there before going on to a full pilot or procurement. We haven't selected what these would be yet, but we do intend to work with agencies to find the set of low risk, high value, repeatable, high learning potential use cases, which should map to administration priorities that'll help the state learn by doing and unveil gaps in necessary infrastructure as we start down the road on these initial ones. That could be targeting efficiency or productivity gains. It could be focused on giving staff superpowers to focus on the work that excites them. It could be making bureaucracy easier to navigate for residents or focus on accessibility, or any number of other focus areas. Second, in order to ensure that Maryland can leverage AI effectively in the longer term, we need to increase AI knowledge and skills across state government. And so that means finding ways to upskill the state workforce, find mechanisms to ensure that we can attract and retain AI talent, even if it's short-term service opportunities, and think through what an AI enablement team or function within DoIT and the state could actually look like based on our particular context. The third thing here is a sort of sandbox environment. This is essentially a centralized environment with an accompanying playbook that agencies would be able to leverage to safely test AI proofs of concept prior to putting them into production. And this is something that we'll need to stand up. It'll be a key piece of infrastructure to have in place to leverage AI over time. And last but not least here, we'll need to structure partnerships with expert and stakeholder groups to ensure that the state is moving in the right direction, that we have access to the necessary expertise, and that we receive input from key voices. These are likely folks from academia, from civil society, from industry, and in some cases, other public sector institutions as well, both federal, local, state level. And we see this work as absolutely crucial, core to getting this set of things done. We don't have all the expertise that we need internally within the state, so we'll have to rely on other folks. And to operationalize those values, to collaborate on innovative uses of state data sets, all of that will be things that we'll rely on these set of partnerships for. So that's it. Hopefully that gives you a good high-level sense of how we're starting to think about AI and the initiatives that we're looking to push forward in the coming months, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Nishant. It's really great to have the perspective that you and the office bring. Just looking around to see if any members have any questions. I'm sure many of them are also watching on YouTube and will have questions following up. Why don't we, I have one question, which you'll probably have to get back to me on, but that is, sounds like a fabulous plan. Do you have timelines and budget for implementation?
I'll have to get back to you on that one.
I figured as much. Thank you very much. Let's move on, and maybe if Nishant, if you can stick around, maybe after Liz presents, people will have further questions. And so just invited McKinsey to offer their perspective on high-level, responsible and productive AI use and governance and can't say the word, how you operationalize this. And so I did note that, Nishant pointed out that the devil is always in the details. So Liz, we're going to turn it over to you, and where you can point out how we actually start to do this, I would appreciate that.
Great to be here. Thanks, Senator Hester, and thanks, Nishant. That was fantastically validating, I think, to hear your plans. I will give you my brief bio so that you understand where I'm coming from with a legal lens, in that I am a consultant at McKinsey, but I spent the last 20 years as a lawyer. I led legal and risk for McKinsey Digital for years, but prior to that, spent 10 years as the general counsel to two different analytics startups, one in the intelligence community and one in the insurance sector. So I have been thinking about legal issues related to analytics and AI for many, many years. And I come to my role through that lens to think through the risks. What I think might be useful and how I propose to present these materials is to talk through what are the actual risks, We know that AI has been around for a long time, and these risks have lived with us. And yet with generative AI, there are existing risks that have been exacerbated, and there are somewhat novel risks. I'm happy to share pages unless someone has them at the ready. I think I will share them unless there's any other objection to it. So
great, Liz. Let me know if you've got capability. It looks like
I do. Yeah, thank you so much. So I will operationalization is a tricky one that I say many times these days, given organizations aren't ready to operationalize responsible AI. It's a funny question that you asked, Senator Hester, about timelines and budget. I think everyone's in the same boat. Everyone, loosely speaking, is excited about the value that generative AI presents. And from CXOs of the C-suite of organizations, both that are technical and non-technical, the majority of them believe that this is going to be a key priority. And this survey was taken in the spring. I imagine that now, if we reran the survey, that these numbers would only increase. And on the right-hand side, I'll draw you to the lack of readiness across organizations from any sector to how to operationalize responsible AI. So I think it's a priority, it's a need, and I think this is something that, given the speed of the desired speed of adoption and the value at stake, this is something that folks are running after. And of course, we all just saw the White House's executive order come out recently that also puts sort of fuel to the feet of mobilizing the federal government to address responsible AI. I will just start with some basics on the risk. We will get to a more focused list of these toward the end, but I've long said, on the digital trust front, how do we trust the technology that is meant to serve us, and serve us meaning, I would say, the constituency of consumers? The bias in the internet is just a fact that we live with. And if you are using the training data that is the internet, the bias exists. All models are biased. We should just expect that. And I would argue that most data sets are biased as well. And by biased here, we mean there's intended bias that we use, purportedly, and then there's unintended bias that is just frankly unfair. So the biased images are across the internet, and that is serving as the training data for large language models. And so it comes to us, if we're using open source LLMs, this comes to us as something that we'll need to address in society. Generative AI platforms also, it is just a known risk that IP infringement is an issue, given there's no scrutiny really in the training data unless you've shaped your own as to what goes into the training data, so that what comes out of the models often can be considered copyright violation. And there are lawsuits all over the place to suggest that this is going to be an issue for a long time. I would argue too that IP law, because of the changes in technology and the availability and the ubiquity of potential violations, I believe that IP law will evolve. We'll see this play out in the courts. But there's our current state of IP protection is potentially not fit for purpose for what we are now faced with now. We'll talk about misrepresentation and lack of fairness, because what is AI and what is not AI is not often clear. And there will be concerted effort, I think, across regulations to help consumers understand what is and what is not AI. And of course, this goes to both inadvertent error and just hallucinations, which is just error inherent to the answers. And then there's purposeful sort of black hat errors that can be issued through prompt injection, and there are a variety of ways that the cyber threats get enhanced through the widespread use of this tool. Just a quick, I feel like everyone needs to know that the bias is, you can do your own experiment. I've done this, lectured at Harvard and MIT, both on asking students to use a search index to research professional haircut, schoolboy uniform, schoolgirl uniform. Just a quick search just brings readily to mind that the internet's so full of bias, we tend to forget it is. And so if you're asking questions that seem fairly benign, it can yield answers that are really harmful to society. I would argue too that the AI plagiarism as an issue, this is something I think educators are worried about, consumers are worried about, but it is also just, some of it is just, folks taking the approach that, this is human generated, but it's AI generated. There are others where, knowing that something is AI as consumers becomes more of an issue when they could be potentially locked out of opportunities through generative AI. There's some systematic exclusion from a protected class, for instance, through the answers. And so understanding what is AI, what is not, and where you need to test and what standards you need to hold to. I think this all comes up from the misrepresentation example. So the disclosures of what is AI and what is not AI will be part of the I think the standards that NIST and others will set. IP infringement, again, is just it's a very even if each individual instance of potential IP infringement is low dollar value in like a final adjudication, the scaled impact of IP infringement on the training data sets is something that we're going to see. And this comes to matter in an organization when using output from generative AI in any sort of consumer facing or internal, but largely consumer facing. If you're using this, just understanding what you're using and where it came from and who may be bringing a cause of action for IP infringement claims. The security example, I think you'll hear about in depth in the next session. It's critical for consumers, given that generative AI enables fraud on a personalized level and at a level of scale that is unprecedented. The voice cloning AI, the ability to take data that one would think was private, but apply it to a fraud attempt through chatbots, and this is something that we'll all need to find new ways to deal with. And I think again you'll hear some solutions, I think, in this last session. But this is something where malicious intent is also at scale with generative AI, with the ubiquity of the tools, the availability, and the personalization that's available. That's both it's a good thing for a whole variety of organizations to make. We all appreciate personalization, but I think it's also a very, very big risk for society. The hallucination risk is very key to understand. If you are creating autonomous agents that are just making decisions based on output without a human in the loop, that human in the loop need is, as technology increases, the hallucinations arguably are getting sort of less frequent. There are ways that AI combats AI in a generative adversarial network capacity. I think Nishant will probably speak to this as he talks through implementation, but reliability is a huge concern. So understanding that the output itself is one set of data points, but not the only set of data points to be making decisions, given the inaccuracy is sort of endemic to the technology and should be caveated in each case that there's error, and there's error from humans as giving advice as well. So it's not a one-to-one sort of binary, but it is something to take into account, that because I think our research has shown that consumers believe that AI is more fair and more accurate than humans. That may or may not be the case. Bringing us to how then shall we think through what would a risk-managed approach to generative AI and AI be? And that's often colloquially termed responsible AI or trustworthy AI or safe AI. The idea is you'll want to pull together, and Nishant covered a lot of this, there are a variety of tools, perspectives, approaches, experts that come together. I guess the biggest headline I would say is this: for all of these things to come together and work together, there must be a risk framework, and then there must be a cross-collaborative team that addresses these risks. Across the framework, here's a very basic one, and a lot of organizations have their values, as Nishant said, that you'll start with, choosing your values. Here is a generic set, and it's something that everyone will come to their own list on, but human-centric is that need to make sure that this is serving humans. This is a technology that has human oversight, has diverse perspectives. It needs to align with than organizations or the state's values. And this is very, very key to start with. This should be the values, and the understanding of the values you're trying to operationalize comes first, and then all strategies and approaches flow from there. Fairness is a tricky thing. It's a necessary thing. Trustworthy and inclusive AI means you are thinking through who within the humans that you are serving, whether from a consumer standpoint or constituency standpoint, who's in that group, who are you trying to serve, and are they represented? Are they represented in the data set? Are they adversely impacted by the design of the model itself? Is there something you're not accounting for in the output of Gen AI that you're not seeing? And so that requires affirmative corrective tests to see, is there unfairness here that was not intended? That becomes a set of standards that will evolve. I think the living document that Nishan mentioned is so key, because the controls to measure for these things will get better and better as the AI develops, and those controls need to be evolved and the protocols around them evolved in almost real time. It's very, very dynamic. Transparency with Gen AI is very tricky because there are large technical constraints that prevent true transparency. It's the internet often training the LLM. And so how do you explain what it is beyond saying, this is the output of a very, very large training set? But there are storytelling and documentation standards. I don't mean storytelling that is fabricated. I mean that walkthrough that Nishant did of how you're going to approach operationalization of responsible AI. This set of choices that you make, that's every organization's explainability. So understanding what you have put into a model, what understanding comes out of the model, what tests you do all along the life cycle of model development, model deployment, any use case that you are assessing, there needs to be a set of choices that you are documenting so that you show, to the extent possible within technical constraints, how decisions you've made were made. What rubric did you use? What test did you apply? And then data protection, privacy, security, these are not new risks. These are just risks that are exacerbated by generative AI. And the White House executive order really focused on, safe, secure, and trustworthy. And the trustworthy had a big emphasis on data privacy. Data privacy is a tricky thing to hold on to. And this is a risk that when correlations are made that are not explainable through black box models, data privacy can be a casualty. So having approaches that enable privacy preserving approaches to model development, both from a people perspective, like what protocols do people follow, and also automated controls, like what do you actually code into what you're doing that keep our private details private, are key for just, again, this human-centric approach to AI. And lastly, the monitoring and evaluation of these AI systems. We've seen years of headlines on model drift and model bias because the models themselves are built specifically. They are sometimes fragile. So with COVID, the data that we expected to be feeding into models that had been built pre-COVID, the data was radically different. And the models, there is danger that the output is way off. So I think once you have models in deployment, and this is maybe something Katie is focused on, models in deployment become something that you just want to dynamically and consistently evaluate with ever evolving standards and controls. So it's not, consistently applying 2023 standards. It will be, first quarter 2024, second quarter 2024, et cetera, in a much more dynamic way. This is sort of the accumulation of risks, and I won't go line by line and force you through the slide, but I will say this is a typical risk framework that is useful to keep top of mind when you're thinking about mitigation and approaches to responsible AI. We talked about fairness, we talked about the IP infringement, and the privacy concerns. We don't know what personal information or sensitive data has gone into these model trainings. So just as the output sort of reflects what is publicly available, even just putting in, there are details that you can find about someone, and our cyber folks have done this for many organizations, where there's a lot of public information available about each one of us. And if we did sort of a red teaming exercise where we looked to see what we could find, both from an IP infringement perspective or an organization's trade secrets perspective or just a personal level of detail, it's frightening what you can find because it's just out there. And this is all feeding into model training. Malicious use and security threats go together. There's inadvertent security threats, just data leakage, or the surface area has grown so vast that the vulnerabilities that are just become larger at scale. And then malicious use, this is something that fraudsters are delighting in because it's yielding great results for malicious content, greater personalized spam, fraud calls, etc. On performance and explainability, this again, when you're looking through use case prioritization and use case evaluation of the value, you'll want to, folks want to, you evaluate what's the value of a use case that we're going to use generative AI to solve, what is the level of effort required for that use case, and then also what are the risks. And if something is purported to be an answer machine, there's output that you'll just make decisions on without careful thought, testing, evaluation, et cetera. You will have, organizations will have high performance risk and certainly high explainability risk because, again, looking back from any scrutiny of decisions that you make, you'll want to have shown your work and documented your work. And across this, understanding that you've tested for, inaccuracy, you've tested for bias, you've tested for fairness. These last two pieces are sort of the new world that we live in, that regardless of what decision an organization makes about responsible or about use of generative AI, the ESG impacts of these large language models is a fact of our current sort of technological footprint in the world. And third-party risks are the waters that we now swim in because third parties are using generative AI. So understanding who's using what, how are they using it, what's coming to you by way of these vendors is something that every organization needs to take into account. So I'll wrap here with just, given this risk profile, there's a very current need, and it's clear that you are doing this, around approaching responsible AI. There's a set of guardrails that you'll want to put in place that need to reflect, again, the values, as Nishant put it, but we'll call it principles here. Just what is it that you want to safeguard? What is very important to make sure is the lens through which you filter all of your choices that you make. And then when you're getting to the use case prioritization, understanding, again, that sort of that cube, if you will, of the value, the level of effort, and the risk severity. That is a sort of an ongoing rubric to apply. I think when any organization is prioritizing use cases, I would also argue that the governance is best in that sandbox environment. I think that Nishant mentioned the governance built for a cordoned off section of use cases is really useful because you're going to develop something that is very fit for purpose for use cases themselves. And then that can be then extrapolated and applied to a larger organization's approaches to risk management. And then lastly, this last pillar, the biggest emphasis I would give any organization is to say, when you are doing this risk management, it is it's always a good idea to have cross-functional risk management teams, but in this case, it is a necessary move to have the developers with legal, with public affairs, with cyber, with HR, finance, the domain experts, whatever it is, the use case, but those folks working together in a cross-functional, very, very dynamic and agile way, such that the controls themselves are consistently evaluated for best in class. It's not one and done. That is a key risk mitigation approach to this new generative AI world that we live in.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was comprehensive and a bit scary. So I really appreciate it. I want to defer to my co-chair, Delegate Kaiser, if she has any questions, or other committee members. We have several on the line with us now. Any questions for Nishant or Liz?
I do not, though I do see other delegates and senators, but thank you as well.
Let me just pose one question because we've got 3 minutes. for either Nishant or Liz or both of you. You know, when we think about, you know, the acceleration that AI is putting on everything, we're going to spend the next 45 minutes talking about cybersecurity. My question is, what should we be doing now to ensure that our state privacy concerns are and preventions like are top notch? Can either of you answer that question?
It's a big question. And we do have a state chief privacy officer who's probably better suited to answer it. But I think that privacy will have to be one of the key values that we center a lot of this work around. And so again, the devil is in how do we define privacy and what does it mean and how do we measure that it's been broken? All of that sort of those definitions need to be in place. The other thing I'll say is that at creating processes that work together across these different areas is key in order to make sure that we can operationalize this stuff as it gets more and more complex over time. So having a separate AI risk process and then a separate privacy process and then a separate, you know, name your thing. If you have 100 different processes, as technology gets more and more complicated, as AI becomes a bigger and bigger part of your stack, it just won't work. We don't have the resources to run that. So that'll be a key, putting those together in some way.
So I did have this conversation with Catalina, and I asked if the points of contact on privacy and all our agencies could also address AI and cyber, and she said they were different skill sets. So I totally agree that we have to, we don't want to be having, you know, multiple investigations, but we've got to figure out how we actually resource this appropriately. Because privacy can be a value, but unless we put resources and capacity behind a value, it's just on paper. Any thoughts from you, Liz?
I will add general thoughts around what Nishant said. I wholeheartedly agree with everything Nishant said. I think one of the long poles in the tent that seems kind of lackluster, but it is really critical in making this work, is once you've chosen a value and decided how you'd like to operationalize the value, folks need education. So there is something around training and communications that is always necessary, but in this case, particularly necessary, that you're using the same language, that folks understand what you're using, what you mean when you say certain words, and that ownership is clear on who is meant to execute against which goals. So like there's a RACI to build, there is a module to add, but for every organization, making sure that anyone who touches the model lifecycle in any way understands what their role is and what is required and what is prescribed, that is really key in making sure this actually works.
Thank you for that, Liz. Okay, just doing a quick pass. Chair Kaiser, I know that you have a previous engagement. Any closing comments before you leave?
Thank you, Senator. Again, just thanking everyone as we continue on this partnership over the next few years and understanding and appreciating the commitment that from Secretary Savage and everyone else in the administration. But repeating what's often been said, administrations come and go and the legislature's always here. And so what is it that we need to put into legislation to, excuse me, what is it that we need to put in legislation to try to ensure that some of these things stay for the long term and not just because they're high on the agenda right now? And so continuing to look for that partnership and advice on what can and should be legislated. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Kaiser. So moving on to our next section, I'd like to applaud all the members who are still here for these 3 hours. We're going fast and there's a lot of information, but it's really good. So we will be moving on to our cybersecurity update. Many of you will remember that we passed a major package of legislation in 2022. We have our new State Chief Information Security Officer, Greg Rogers, and our Director of Local Cybersecurity, Netter Squires. And I believe that we asked, first of all, if you could give us an update on the cybersecurity centralization strategy. And, second, to comment on anything that the agency has done to kind of implement the, that package from 2022. So I'll turn it over to you, Greg.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
I think you might have just frozen. Either you froze or I froze.
Well, while Greg is coming back online, I can step in for a second. So Greg joined with the rest of the leadership team that I brought on board in August. And in addition to Esquire, you'll hear from today, we have Lance Cleghorn, who's the new director of state cybersecurity. He just started parental leave, which is exciting for him. But he will be another face that you'll see in the coming months as he's really leading the statewide approach to how we expand our tools to state agencies. But I think Greg will start his presentation today speaking to the results of the first biannual assessment. So we can sort of speak to the results, which I think tees up nicely, why we need to move quickly with the statewide cyber centralization strategy to ensure that, what we learned from that process was that agencies don't have the tools or the resources, the expertise to be able to remediate on their own, which is why we need to move quickly on the centralization strategy. And that will also speak to how we're also ensuring that municipalities and school districts and sort of more hyper local efforts are also being accounted for because they do have some of the largest risk profiles. And then we'll also speak to some of the initiatives we're working on with regard to universities and National Guards, et cetera. So Greg, if you're back online, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, can you all hear and see me now?
Yeah.
I don't know. All of a sudden, my internet connection went unstable.
No worries. Thanks, Greg.
So, yeah, like I was saying, so thank you for the introduction, Secretary Savage. I've been on board about 3 months now. We all kind of started together back in the end of August. Prior to coming to the state, I originally spent about 15 years in the Department of Defense. I was a contractor there. And, so in that time, I developed a broad background in IT and cybersecurity and finished out my career there, focusing on cyber risk assessments and really learning risk management in cybersecurity. The key thing we focused on with that is we weren't looking at like technical vulnerabilities. We're really focused on how risks impacted mission. So that's something that, I bring forward to this role. We're really looking at the mission of the state and the services we provide to all state agencies from DoIT, as well as what we support in providing services out to, our constituents across the entire state. And making sure we're operating within the appropriate risk there. Moving on from my DoD career, I spent the last 6 years as a CISO within the commercial industry at a financial services firm. So, I bring a mixture of that government and private sector experience to this role. And, I rely on both of those to both understand how government works internally, but also try to bring some of the agility from that commercial space and really try to implement some of that here so that we can hopefully, act in a more agile way because cyber moves so quickly. So we want to make sure that we are responding to our threats and responding to, the security gaps and vulnerabilities that we discover in the assessments we do. We can move to the next slide, please. So sorry for cramming so much information on this one slide, but it really was a big project. As we've referenced before, the legislation, one of the things it mandated was to do an assessment of all the state agencies every 2 years and then do the remediation from that. So this image kind of shows the distribution across the entire state of the findings grouped into similar types. And I listed the top 10 finding areas on the side there. And overall, what we've found in doing the analysis is while individual findings might be different from agency to agency, they tend to fall in very similar buckets. So there are a number of things we can do at OSM and within DoIT to provide services that will address a number of these findings statewide. And that's kind of the key of centralization. We provide something that we manage the risk there while enabling, the mission owners, the agencies, to manage their own users and interaction with that. So, you can see some of the things like the GRC program, and I'll touch on that in a little bit more detail. But also the cyber continuity team and the cyber resilience team within OSM will help to address, a number of the issues around incident response, and continuity. Things like our attack surface management tools and vulnerability management tools. Those will help to address some of our, asset management, identity and access and authentication issues, configuration management, things like that. So, we're trying to find ways that we can, leverage tools within DoIT and OSM and provide holistic, centralized services to address these findings across the state. Some of the top constraints on the left side there that we've found is really around lack, it all kind of falls into lack of management, planning, skills, staffing. So it really comes down to the people. The agencies just don't have the people that have the knowledge and skills to implement strong security programs in a diverse or a distributed manner. So that's another thing we're trying to do within OSM to develop this holistic security program to address these issues in one place, so that, and again, I'll touch on this more, the GRC team, we will provide a single security framework, which will then drive a single set of state information security policies and standards. And that will be what all of our controls and all of the tools we use across DoIT and the entire state will be based on. It will be the guiding principles on how we configure and secure all of the different applications and platforms we implement. And one of the nice things about that is the security management will come out of OSM for the state. And then each agency doesn't need to worry about that. They can, inherit those policies and standards. They'll be written in a way that is, agency and really technology agnostic. It won't mandate specific tools or software applications. It will be written in such a way that it can be applied to any major platform. So that way, the agencies are still free to implement the how, but we will provide to them the what of what needs to be done to secure their organizations. And then we'll also help with the staffing side of things. In one, the GRC team will do a lot of that heavy lifting, but then what we've talked about with the ISO program, that's another area where we'll provide that expertise in cybersecurity out to the agencies, and even extend it out to local governments, which Netta will touch on a little bit more. And then what that does is, if you see I have competing priorities listed there as well, all of those things then free up the resources within each agency to then address what those other competing priorities are. They can focus on their major pain points, and managing their individual needs, their individual projects, so that we've taken that onus off them and given them back some of that capacity that they need. Okay, we can move to the next slide. So centralization, this is another thing that came out of the legislation. I think this is really important. We're seeing this happen across many states and working into a whole of state approach. And as Secretary Savage mentioned earlier, we have these concentric rings. First we're looking at OSM and DoIT and building the program, building the teams in order to support this centralization strategy across the state, and then again extend it out to local units of government So we're looking at how we build our capabilities and our capacity and what our needs are there, and then helping DoIT to implement, the security requirements they need within the services they provide out to the state, and then expanding that out to the state agencies and local governments. So we have one holistic approach to cybersecurity, and really one major platform for each area, such as CrowdStrike for endpoint detection and response, Tenable for vulnerability management. And if I mention an acronym or a technology or a tool that you're not familiar with, please, I invite questions. I can clarify on that. I try to keep this high level, but sometimes we just, mention things that I don't expect everybody on this call to understand. So if you have questions or want me to explain something, please, interrupt me, and I'm happy to do that. But it's really, the centralization strategy that is guiding all of this. So as I'm working to build, the team and our capabilities and expand our capacity, I'm really doing that on top of what my predecessors have built. Centralization strategy was written before I came on board, and it is really a good strategy to implement and drive cybersecurity across the state. So, there's a lot of work that has been done previously, such as some of these key tools, like I said, CrowdStrike, building the Maryland SOC and ISAC, performing these assessments. This is all work that was done previously that is really a key foundation to what we're trying to do now. Going back to those assessments, one of the things I wanted to say was it really set the baseline really consistently across the state of where all the agencies are. It helped us to determine, the overall maturity of our cybersecurity as well as the individual maturity. And what we found is that it's actually quite low. And, the numbers that we're looking at, like 1.75 to 1.9 as the holistic average across the state, that really is kind of similar for all agencies. We don't have a lot of outliers that are 3s and 4s. That just didn't really exist. Everybody is consistently at that level. So we have a lot of work to do to bring the entire state up. But what that also means is we have a lot of the same findings that we're going to address with the centralization strategy, by OSM and DoIT delivering these services out in a consistent manner. We can address that across the board to really increase that cyber maturity and get everybody up to the same level. We can move to the next slide. And these are like the 3 key pillars, 3 areas that we're working on. So centralization, as I touched before, really building out those capabilities to provide that to the entire state. I'm going to skip over the one and talk about maturity of OSM. So a lot of the foundation has been set. A lot of the applications have been implemented. The MD SOC and MD ISAC are there. Now what we're looking at is how we expand that capacity out to all agencies and then local governments beyond that. In order to do that, one thing we want to do is get everybody on board into the MD SOC. So we will need, more staff to do that. But in the assessment of our capacity, what we found is it's not just that we need more staff, but we also need to change how we're addressing some of the key issues we see day in and day out. And what we found is about 60% of our time in the SOC is spent addressing reported phishing emails. And we believe that if we get better tooling implemented on our email platform to filter out a lot of that spam and phishing, we can cut that down, to rather than 60% of the team's time to something probably closer to 20% of their time, maybe even less, which really effectively increases our capacity to take on more agencies and local governments into the SOC, just by implementing one strong new tool. So we're in the process of evaluating things like that that help increase the capacity without actually increasing staff. We're also, and I'm going to touch on further, looking at other partnerships to more quickly and easily increase that staffing as well, which will have a greater effect on growing the capacity. Another thing is that GRC function, as I was talking about, they'll be focused on developing those standards and policies in a centralized way, so everybody doesn't have to do everything on their own, which then also will be able to measure compliance centrally, and that will be another function of the GRC team. And that team will also plug into working with Nishant on responsible AI and bringing, policies and standards into the security library. It'll also plug into the state chief privacy officer. So we will, we not just be looking at this from a cybersecurity lens, we'll also be looking at it from a privacy and a data management lens. So all of the state chief officers will be working together to make sure that everything we produce addresses issues across the board. And Netta, if you'd like to talk a little bit more about local cybersecurity.
Sure. Thank you, Greg. Good morning, or afternoon, I guess now. Madam Chairs, Hester, Kaiser, committee members. My name is Netta Squires. I'm the Director of Local Cybersecurity, and my background is in public safety, cybersecurity, emergency management, and law. For the past 6 years before coming to Maryland, I was based out of one of our locals in Montgomery County in the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. And much of the work that I led there includes bringing partners together, building systems and frameworks that support a whole community approach for crisis management, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. So as the secretary and Greg noted before me, DoIT is building out this centralized whole of state approach. And the first way that we began to achieve that was by bringing together our actual whole of state partners to the table. So we created something called the Maryland Local Cybersecurity Collaborative, and the collaborative is a collaboration between CIOs, CISOs, so Chief Information Officers, Chief Information Security Officers, at the county, municipality, public school systems. We have 180 members currently, 100% participation from county members, 100% participation from our public school systems. A little lower on our municipality participation, need to grow that. And we have several community colleges. We also have agencies like MSDE that are critical partners to our collaborative approach, many others. And then very tremendously valuable partners like the MSI, SAC, CISA, MABE, the Maryland Association Board of Education, MML, MACO, FBI, legislators such as Senator Hester that joins us, and more. So through the MLCC, we were really able to create these partnerships across the state, build a trust and these open lines of communications with the local and a lot of information sharing. We were also able to help conduct surveys and assess the needs and the gaps across the state. And this allowed us to be more, or still allows us to be more strategic and thoughtful about how to build system processes and tools that can help close those gaps and create this equitably secure community across the state. This also allows us to think about how to leverage economies of scale and how we can explore shared services and create opportunities for partnerships with academic institutions, the National Guard, and other local associations to develop solutions to close these gaps. One example is we've been working with MABE, the Maryland Association Board of Education, to work with their technology provider to rebuild the assessment tool that they already have to help our public school systems comply with the assessment requirements in SB 754 in Section 5. So that's just one example. DoIT also created a webpage for locals with guides on all the legal requirements, as well as some additional information and resources that are helpful to them. DoIT's also grown its ability to provide critical intelligence to our locals through information sharing services like the MDISAC, our CTI teams, our vulnerability teams, and of course the Maryland SOC. Another thing that has really helped grow this approach, this sort of whole of state and centralized approach, is the state and local cybersecurity grant program. So we're co-leading that with MDEM, and we have an active and really dedicated committee that's made up of many partners across the state in accordance with the statutory requirements of the grant. And as of the latest meeting in early November, the committee voted to use grant funds for an ISO program, which is Information Security Officer program, which is a way to help offset some of the needs in such as staffing and expertise through kind of a shared model, shared service model. They also voted to support EDR capabilities, endpoint detection and response capabilities. And then they also voted early on in the year on their priorities, which were to achieve some basic level of resiliency like firewalls, EDR, MFA, security awareness trainings, and vulnerability management. DoIT also works closely with CISA and the MSISAC, which are organizations that have a lot of free resources that we highly encourage our locals to leverage. We also participate in regional and national level groups to both learn from them, leverage what other states are doing and address, that are already addressing similar issues, and explore other collaboration opportunities. So through all these efforts, as some examples, and the centralization efforts, and in close coordination with the Director of State Cybersecurity, Lance Clayhorn, DoIT continues to build and grow our capabilities to support locals through a whole of state approach. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Netta. I don't know if anyone has any questions for Netta before we move on.
Looks like we're good to move on.
So just to back up what Netta said is, one of the approaches I'm taking now with, the organization with OSM is everything we do is from a whole of state approach. I'm really making sure that everybody understands within the organization that we're focused on providing our services to the state and local governments. The way we develop our programs, the way we develop our service offerings, we want to do that in such a way to be able to provide those services out to everybody. And so that goes into, the centralization strategy and into the whole of state approach, but also with maturing our capacity and capabilities in such a way to do that. So here are some of the key initiatives. The cybersecurity assessments really set that baseline for us to identify what we need to do across the state to raise everybody up to what we feel is an acceptable level, maturity rating target of a 3 to begin with. And over time, we would continually increase that to just improve the cyber posture across the state. The previous assessments were done in such a way that it does build a really solid, consistent baseline. So now in the next round of assessments, what we want to do is we want to focus on, rather than identifying maturity scores, we want to look more at a risk-based approach. And so we want to do it in a more agile manner that addresses things quicker so that we can focus on the risk to the state. We already have that baseline, so now we're going to take it to the next step and really take a more advanced approach. And like I said earlier, cybersecurity risk is really the way we want to look at all of this. Going on from there, partnerships has been something we're really driving full force at. We're working with the National Guard. We're working with state colleges, universities. We've already met with UNBC, and we're looking at meeting with other universities to build things like our internship programs, but also to help, increase our capacity within the Maryland SOC so we can take on more entities, to have, more staff that can do assessments, particularly of local government entities, because, the size and complexity of the state agency assessments doesn't always fit the needs at the local. So we want to have an agile approach there as well, that we can tailor the size and complexity of our assessments. And by building these partnerships, we can leverage the expertise that the National Guard brings in that area, and the capacity enhancements from, state and local schools. You know, and really it's going to be a real strong focus on local governments with these partnerships, because we feel that's the area, as Netta was saying. If you just look at the news, that's where a lot of the cyber attacks happen. So, you know, we feel that ignoring the locals in this aspect, it doesn't address the risk that our constituents, our Maryland residents, face every day. You know, if ignoring the locals and only focusing on state cybersecurity, that doesn't address the end goal here. So we really want to take that holistic approach. Also, you know, building the OSM managed services. So making sure that things like our managed firewall services, our vulnerability management services, the EDR with CrowdStrike, growing the SOC and the ISAC teams. Also being able to provide that security expertise through the ISO program, you know, really kind of looking at it as consultants. You know, they are security experts that we will have within OSM, and they will also come from the National Guard and the colleges, and we'll be able to provide that support out to the state agencies and local entities where they need assistance. It might be in developing their program, or it might be in engineering specific solutions, or finding their gaps and filling them. So we want to have that team that can go out and do that on an as needed basis. In addition to that, it's our cybersecurity centers of excellence. You know, we just want to build a library of templates, specifically things like incident response and disaster recovery plans, you know, assessment templates, you know, plan templates for continuity operations. That way, again, everybody doesn't have to develop that from scratch. They can work to the next step of actually addressing the issue within their own organization. But also by providing those templates, it's a consistent approach across the state. So we'll be able to, you know, assist one agency or another. We'll be able to assess, you know, the maturity of that kind of thing across the whole state, and focus on areas that we have issues. And if we see as you know, agencies fill those out where they have common struggles, we can then use things like the ISO team, you know, under Netta and Lance, or the GRC team to help mature our processes and better define our processes to support them, but also, you know, target their issues as well. Lastly, oh yeah.
I just want to interrupt. We're about at time, and I do have a question. Is this the last slide?
Yes, this is the last slide.
Okay.
So the K through 12 support, you know, we call this out specifically because that is such a huge, just an area. There's so many staff members there. It's spread across everywhere in the state, and there are huge numbers of users. I mean, there's you know, 1 million students, and you know, we have 1 million endpoints. So that is something that, in order for us to really approach that whole of state, we really need to make sure we're focusing the resources that we need in that area. But that's it. So I'm happy to take questions.
Fabulous. Well, I just want to start by saying to both you and Netta, you know, thank you so much for your time today and for your ongoing efforts. I know it's a huge job. There's so much work to do. And this committee has really worked hard, you know, prior to your arrival, to make sure that there was funding and staff in the budget for you guys to start to deploy, so that we can make our state as, you know, safe and secure as possible. I do want to look around and see if anybody else has questions before I ask mine. I know, you know, some of our members are watching, but they may send questions afterwards. Okay, so I'm going to ask my question. It's one big question with 5 subcomponents. And it really is, the big question is, how can we help? I mean, the legislature stands ready to be your partner. We want to shore up our state agencies, our local governments, and our K through 12. And it seems like we've made a lot of strategic plans, but we need to move into the implementation phase. So part one, what are the plans and timelines and any resources necessary to help the agencies meet the vulnerabilities found in their assessments? Like, I've heard for 2 years now, we're at 1.75. Like, I know we need to do something. Like, how can we help? Question two, the assessments are biannual, so we're coming up. We'll have to do them again in 2024. Are we ready to do those yet? Part number three, the partnerships that you mentioned. Prior to your arrival, Delegate Bartlett and I worked on a bill to try to pull in the National Guard. So I'm so happy that that partnership is coming. Also, entirely support apprenticeships and internships, with our college students. Are those partnerships free, or have you budgeted to support those partnerships? Fourth part of the question, is the federal funding that we have for state and locals enough? Is it consistent? Should we be doubling down on these amazing ideas you guys have around the ISO program to make sure that that program is sustainable by supplementing our federal money with state money? And last but not least, you mentioned staffing is a major concern at the agencies. Do we need to have independent salary setting authority for cybersecurity professionals across our agencies? So that was a lot that I just threw at you, Greg and Netta, but I would like answers to those questions before session starts, if possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. Some of them are difficult to answer right now. One specific one I can say is that, the scores for the assessments, they won't actually change until we do the next round of assessments. That's where the score comes from. I do know that agencies have been working at different levels to fix some of these issues. We're also working within OSM to fix some of these issues. As far as a timeline, that's really something that would be hard to say at this point. And we just need to do more assessment on the actual results to see what specific things are required, as well as going back out to the agencies and getting updates on what they've done at this point. So I think for the most part, we have to do a little bit more assessment on this to get back with firm answers for you. But we are working on all of that.
Fabulous. Well, I look forward to those answers. I think this committee has really seen the importance of investing in cybersecurity. ABC News this morning reminded us that it cost Baltimore County Schools $10 million to clean up after that mess. My preference would be to investing proactively in preventing the disruption rather than paying for it afterwards. The K through 12 are, state, at least half state funded. And so, we bear a brunt when they get attacked. So thank you guys for doing the hard work. We look forward to continuing our partnership with you. Just a quick round look again. Any other delegate senators have any questions? Okay. With that, we will then move on to our final section of the
A lot
day.
of questions.
Pardon?
I was just going to ask one favor from you. If you could put those questions in writing to us, just so we have them, because it was quite a lot. I just want to make sure we're addressing all of your concerns and questions.
Thank you, Greg. The big question is, how can we help? The 5 specific areas I will send by email.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Appreciate you guys so much. Okay, so our last panel really brings together artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. Back in June, Senator Ron Watson asked a question. He said, what does AI mean for cybersecurity? And so we pulled together this panel to try to answer that question. I broke it down into 3 pieces. How does artificial intelligence exacerbate the risks to cybersecurity? 2, how can we use artificial intelligence to improve our response to cybersecurity? And 3, given the answers to 1 and 2, how should the state proceed? We've got a great panel to answer those 3 questions. Got 3 different and unique responses. I'm just trying to find the agenda again. I believe we will have first up Dave Mahoney, the AI risk manager for RSM. He will be followed by Ahmed Masood, Chief Executive Officer of Safe AI Inc. from Maryland. And we'll wind up with Thomas McClellan, Director of Government Affairs and Strategy from Palo Alto. I'm going to ask that each of these individuals do their presentation and we hold all questions to the end. And with that, I will turn it over to Dave. Dave, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to your remarks.
No, I really appreciate the invitation, and I appreciate the time and attention of the committee members. So thank you. So in preparation for this, our firm was asked to provide some relevant information to three specific questions. How does generative AI increase cybersecurity risks? How do we use artificial intelligence to strengthen cybersecurity? And then given the questions or answers to 1 and 2, what are some recommendations for the state of Maryland? So in preparation, we prepared a report that I think will be shared with the members. But I'm going to walk through some of our remarks, and feel free to ask questions as we go. So in number 1, how does generative AI increase cybersecurity risks? We described 4 major categories of cyber threats that are relevant to generative AI, and it's enhanced social engineering, automated attack capabilities, data privacy, and then AI model vulnerability. Within those categorical groupings, there's various types of threats and attack vectors that can occur. So we grouped them into those large 4 categories, and then we gave specific examples of each type of attack, and we talk about its potential impacts. Just as an example, the one that I'm going to really focus in on the most, because I believe it's the most prevalent, is enhanced social engineering. So generative AI, as we know, can be very convincing, and we can use to create voices and the written word that seem very familiar to us. And so what we've seen, and this is publicly available information and common public surveys in our news, our older generations within just the past year have been targeted with sophisticated AI voice social engineering, and they've been convinced into relinquishing information and had identity theft, and they've lost, I believe the article I read, into the order of billions of dollars in retirement income, which is very concerning. So I think the number 1 thing is this isn't just a problem for us as people that work in corporations and within agencies, but it's also a problem for the public. And so a concerted campaign of education about these types of social engineering attacks and how they can impact us. We need to be educating our populace and our staff, obviously inclusive in that, so that they can be aware and how to just use some, they're really common sense tactics. Don't release information over the phone, regardless of who's calling you. If it's, they say it's your credit card, or they say it's your banking or your lender, call them back, go to their website, get their 800 number off of your statements and call them directly, and then engage with them using known communication methods, not just because somebody called your cell phone or interacted with you through an email, right? So a concerted education campaign will really help here. We talked a little bit about the K through 12 and how that can that area can be very risky and financially impactful to the state. Social engineering, not so much for our students necessarily. At least in my experience, my children's devices are very well controlled and locked down. However, the social engineering attacks to our teachers and to our staff and to our support folks that work in these agencies and in these areas, that is still a concern. And so if our people are going to be inside of our kind of secure network perimeter, and that is how these attackers are going to get in using their credentials and using their information, it's going to be very important to start challenging with, instead of just 2-factor authentication, various types of multi-factor authentication. Making sure that these educators and the administrators are also aware and educated about these types of attacks and what they need to be doing to protect their systems and their liability in this particular area. Going back to this, kind of ties into what Greg was saying, actually. establishing identity and access controls at the highest levels, right, at the OSM level, and then pushing that down, not only the what, but being relatively prescriptive about the what and the intention of how you want these controls to be implemented is going to be very important. We want to make sure that people that are using the devices are the people that are actually using them and their credentials haven't been harvested, and things of that nature, so that we can keep these systems safe and secure. Excuse me, I'm sorry, my screens are flashing for some reason. I think I'm having power problems. Can everybody still hear me okay? Is my connection all right?
Your connection is fine.
Thank you.
I can hear you, Dave.
I'm sorry, like I said, my screens are flashing, so I got nervous I was having a power problem.
No, you're good.
Thank you. So automated attack capabilities is another particular area of concern. So some of the biggest risk in this field of study is really about the convergence of technology, automation, machine learning, artificial intelligence. And so when we start putting these things together for beneficial purposes or useful and productive purposes, we get really great outcomes. However, if you invert that and you look at it from a harmful perspective, you can also now do things in you can do harmful things in a much more dynamic and a much faster paced way than you would have been able to in the past. So let's use this an example. If I am a nefarious person and I want to use social engineering to gain access to various systems or individual information, as opposed to me having to target a very small number of people, because I can only do so much as one person and one individual and absorb so much information and output so information. I can now use automation and machine learning to target individuals based on what's publicly available to me on their social profiles or on the dark web from previous breaches that have not, their data has not been taken down or is still out there floating around that may still be relevant. And I can accumulate that information and develop a relatively accurate profile of multiple individuals that I can now go and target. And I can target them over a very short period of time using much larger sets of targeted emails or targeted phone calls and text messages than I would have been able to in the past, because I don't need to generate each individual communication. I can use LLMs and generative AI to generate those communications for me, and even give me a risk rate or an efficacy rating to say, hey, based on these emails that you generated, which ones do you think are going to be the most effective against person A? Which ones do you think are going to be most effective against person B? And so when you start stacking these different attack vectors on top of each other, and you add in the automation components, you start getting into very sophisticated, very high speed types of attacks that would have taken much longer periods of time in the past. And so it makes this idea, we talked a lot about how the SOC currently is under significant load as a result of spam and phishing email communications. So adopting technology, which they do exist today, that use natural language processing and also the email addresses and the header information to identify phishing and scam emails on receipt to kind of the email server infrastructure, but also more continuously on receipt of the user. And if it gets spread within the organization, you want to be able to identify those communications very quickly, and you want to be able to remove them from circulation in as close to real time as you possibly can, to avoid having to waste operational time of having SOC analysts do triage on each one of these specific things and try to determine if there's a broader kind of level of impact here. You want to just be able to get this low-hanging fruit out of the environment, low-hanging risk, I should say, out of the environment as quickly as possible. So I would highly recommend, there was a suggestion that was already on the table about doing that. That's a great methodology. We highly recommend that. So if we move on past some of the scariness and we talk about some other things that can be done in that same vein to protect ourselves, the machine learning capabilities and types of anomaly detection that we can do. This has been happening for a long time. We've been hearing about, developing a security baseline, and then that's how endpoint protection tools work, like CrowdStrike. They look at patterns of typical behavior on system usage, and then they do regressive analysis to look for deviations from those patterns, and time series analysis and graph analysis and other things. But the point is, this has been happening for a long time, and this is another type of AI. It's just machine learning and deep learning, the practical implementations of AI. And so the SOC, for example, I guarantee you, in the capacity that the SOC is operating today, they are using some level of machine learning and deep learning to sift through this alert data and really kind of try to focus in on the most high value alerts that they have, and then continuously tune that data set over time. So those are all good things. But moving into the future, the natural language processing kind of identification of potentially suspicious emails and communications, whether they're insider threats or outside threats, those are going to be where some of the things happen. But more importantly, I'd like to talk about predictive analysis. And so there's a couple of different ways that we can talk about predictive analysis to better the security landscape. Number one, threat intelligence. So having a threat intelligence informed community where we're publishing discovered phishing and disinformation and other types of social engineering attacks to our staff on a regular basis, so that it's a live wire alert bulletin, right? Of this is what's happening in the world that we are seeing in these different regions of the United States that are attacking these different kinds of industries. So you should be on the lookout for these types of indicators. Putting that information directly in someone's path so that they can see it every day, and it helps develop a cyber culture. And we really have to be doing this on an individual level. It's not good enough just to say, well, the corporation is going to do it. Well, the agency is going to do it. Well, the government is going to do it. We need to really abandon that in a digital age, and we need to start embracing these concepts on an individual level. And so using threat intelligence in a daily type of publication that goes out to our staff and our users of technology, and depending on what our business purpose is, sometimes our public constituents as well. But having that information be readily available to them so they can know what to be on the lookout for, I think is really kind of moving in the right direction of how we should embrace the future. Dynamic risk ranking and prioritization of vulnerabilities. So Senator Hester, we talked a little bit about this over the phone, and then we just came up more recently with Greg. So if you think about your set of protections in terms of governance and control as a perimeter, right? But then it's a permeable perimeter because you have to have data that flows in and out. Are we doing okay on time?
I think it's about at the top of your 10 minutes, Dave.
Okay, I apologize. Thank you for that.
No, I'm always fascinated, but we just got two other speakers to get to.
No, I'm glad you told me. My timer said I still had 4 minutes left, so I don't know what happened there. My apologies. If you think about this perimeter as a permeable kind of membrane, right? Your vulnerabilities are going to be the areas of most ease of attack, right? They're going to look for vulnerabilities where that perimeter is most weak, and they're going to try to poke through there. So today we have the ability to identify vulnerabilities. That's not a big deal, but we don't have the decent ability to identify vulnerabilities and understand where they are in the actual architecture and perimeter of our network or of our systems, and then what data is behind those specific systems where that vulnerability exists, and get an accurate, in my specific situation, this vulnerability is high, medium, or low. All we can really do today is use threat intelligence about how vulnerabilities are being exploited, and if they've been exploited to significant material terms, that gets put, and if it's on a perimeter device, it gets a higher score. If it's not on a perimeter device, it gets a lower score. It's a very old way of doing things, but it's the way that we're all doing it. And so investing in companies that are going to do research about this dynamic prioritization and risk ranking is going to be very important. Let me just sum up with this. Overall, the primary things that we would like to recommend are governance and pushing that down from a top-down kind of level approach. We need to establish agency governance. Well, let's just say state governance. And then we need to have subordinate casts of IT and security governance, data governance, and then also now in this, where believe it or not, we need to have some level of AI governance as well, because there's a specific type of system implementation and design that's going to be appropriate to them. But establishing data governance is going to be paramount, because everything that we're talking about is tied back to data. And in order to establish good data governance, one of the key activities that you're going to need to embark on is taking an inventory of the data that you have and that various agencies have, and you're going to need to solicit, what is this data? How is it categorized? And you're going to have to provide them a categorization or a labeling matrix, and then developing a sensitivity matrix to go along with that. And then you need to put in the right proper level of controls around the entire systems architecture that is going to need to go in place to protect those different types of sensitivity. And it sounds a lot worse than it is, but getting an inventory of the data types and then going through and working through a labeling and a tagging activity and assigning those sensitivity values, I would say would be a very high priority item that I would like to recommend.
I would agree with you there. Sorry, I just froze. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate that. I'm going to go on to the next couple panels to get everybody in. If you could park in your maybe to follow up offline, I would be curious on that data governance, what it takes to operationalize that. We have a fantastic chief data privacy officer, and then we have points of contact in each agency. But like, I think that, to the extent that we can use, tools like you were talking about to try to identify, rank, and safeguard the data. I mean, keeping the data safe for the citizens of Maryland is really, truly important to me and to this committee. So we'll take that offline. So next up, we have, and members, if you have questions for Dave, we'll finish and we'll be able to get those at least on the record before we close. Next, I'd like to introduce Ahmed Masood. I hope I said that right. Why don't you introduce yourself? I recently met Ahmed and thought it was super important that we had a local small business. Sorry, not small business, a local business.
Perfectly fine. It's a startup.
A local startup to give their perspective, given that things are changing so fast. So please introduce yourself and your company, and then if you can address the 3 questions we discussed, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. So let me start by saying good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I'm Ahmed Masood. I am the co-founder of Safe AI, which is a Maryland data security company. I am an IT serial entrepreneur with about 4 decades of experience in creating and developing IT tools. Almost 25 of those years were spent building cybersecurity solutions and fighting hackers and securing our data. Since we are short on time, I'm going to jump right in and give my sort of thoughts on, or our thoughts on, the 3 questions that you asked, Senator Hester. One of the things that I wanted to just kind of step back and talk about before going into how AI and cybersecurity come together is to really talk about the where we were a year ago in November 2022 and where we are today. Exactly 1 year ago, almost to the day, almost within a week, ChatGPT was introduced to the world, which has changed the way the world works, because it allows for people to have a human conversation with a computer and have the computer generate solutions to really tough problems. And one of those tough problems is, how do I bypass someone's cybersecurity? And as a hacker, the first thing I want to do is have it analyze existing source code of existing servers, look at existing policies that you've put in place, have it come up with a bypass to all of them, and use that to start my attack. Like as I was everything that we do as defenders, right now I was listening to all of the wonderful things that we've done. And the first thing that came to my mind was I would take all of the, let's say, Maryland policies and put them in ChatGPT and say, tell me how I can bypass this. Like, and it would give me some potential steps forward. And that's the scary part. As Dave has said, and as everybody knows, that AI has multitude of benefits, but when we have bad actors that start to capitalize on Gen AI, they start thinking the way I just demonstrated. And one of the basic things is to understand is that generative AI phishing attacks were mentioned to generate very human sounding emails that somebody can send out for just to make someone else click on a link. That's all they want to do. As an attacker, I just want you to click on one link and I will have access. The thing is, now with generative AI, I can also create software that will, beyond just writing emails or writing subversive messages to somebody, and create things that will counterattack, that will specifically attack vulnerable systems. We have a SOC. I could start creating false attacks to fill out everybody's attention to all these auditing messages that are being created in a SOC environment. If you have audit logs, let me overwhelm it by side channel attacks. And you want phishing emails that you think that you can detect. I will use ChatGPT to create so many domains that, in order to attack, that it would be very hard to keep up with the news of which domains are good and which domains are bad. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. So the artificial intelligence landscape completely changes the way we have to think about security. Every approach to security, and I think Dave just mentioned, it's that we have different perimeters, and we are just looking for one chink in the armor. And the perimeter security has always had gaps, even the ones that are currently using AI or machine learning, and they're vulnerable to hacking. And it's a cat and mouse game, and no matter what you try, if you're chasing the attacker, it's a win or lose situation. So we are consistently chasing the attacker, and we're consistently racing against the clock, because once the attack has started, there's a time gap between it starting and then it getting detected and its impact being verified. So that is not that traditional security was already partially failing. Now with AI, especially generative AI, that race cannot be won. And understanding that is very important. And when the playing field, because with generative AI, with machine learning in general, you're going to have a changing playing field. Your battlefield is changing, and the data itself somehow has to have the ability to maintain its confidentiality, integrity, availability, security, and its sensitivity labeling. So you cannot go, the solution has to, whatever solutions we look at, they have to apply for those solutions have to solve this problem. As you just very, very correctly pointed out, the data has to be the most important thing. And Maryland is already taking has already taken steps towards that by creating a data privacy officer, if I understand correctly. Cybersecurity is a hard problem. Is anybody able to view my screen?
So you should have screen sharing, but I can't see it right now. Are you able? Have you tried to share?
I tried to share, and I don't know if people are sharing it.
No,
See
now we
that.
see it. Now we see it.
Do you see it now? Hang
Yes.
on. Okay. All
Was
right.
this was this your first slide?
No,
Ed, or-
this was not my first slide.
Oh,
I will share the slide deck.
that would be fabulous. We'll put it on the website.
Great. So one of the things that we want to just get a focus on is the cybersecurity is a hard problem, because the centralization effort that we were looking at from a cyber perspective at the state level is a great idea, but you are also looking at networks that are made up of disparate parts because they were created at different times, especially if we're looking at K-12 type of fidelity. Legacy infrastructure exists, legacy applications exist. Different counties update their school systems at different times as budgets permit. And while we are wonderfully making these great rules and policies, bad actors don't really care because they don't follow any rules. They will not wait for you to update your system before they start attacking you. And the rate of data creation is exploding at a ridiculously large number, and it is not really possible to comprehend how big that number is. We're constantly creating data. So imagine constantly creating data that is sourced from other sensitive data that you now are trying to label and figure out how important it is, et cetera, without involving a system that actually takes that into account is going to be another layer of complexity that we cannot manage. And we're trying to do this at a state level, and we have a bunch of stakeholders, and we have a diverse ecosystems. And I'm afraid to say right now, policies aren't keeping up pace with technology. Like it's not. We had one legislation pass in 2022, and the world has changed since 2022. And now we're doing evaluations. I think you said biannually, if I recall correctly. Am I off there, or are we doing them quarterly? I don't remember, Senator Hester. You said something to that effect.
The assessments are done every 2 years.
Every 2. Well, that means that we are now missing. We are doing assessments every 4 traditional generations of software. The world of software hardware changes every 6 months. Every 6 months, whatever you thought was the brand new thing is obsolete. So that's not in lockstep. And because generative AI allows us to create new attacks, new software, new creative ways, mind you, these are not good. These are bad creative ways to attack systems. It's we have to look at something that is continuously evaluating and continuously delivering on what can be done. And there, I think Natisha's main point that we have to have a mechanism where we can constantly evaluate and take a proactive approach and not focus on stopping the inevitable attack, but actually focus on data and immediate continuity of operations. That needs to be done. And I think, personally speaking, I'll come back to what I think Maryland can do. We have untapped innovation. We have obviously we have people from NSA. We are hosting NIST. We are hosting the NCCOE, which is the National Cybersecurity Center for Excellence, which creates a lot of background stuff for NIST to put out all the standards. I think that the creation an isolated sandbox before we start, it's a bad idea to say, okay, we're going to create a policy, and then we're going to go look for tools that match it, and then we'll try that tool out, and then we'll see if that works. The time that takes is so long that if we reverse the process, if someone comes to Maryland and says, we've got a technology that can solve this current problem that's happening today, rather just put it in a small sandbox. This entire sandbox can be built out of virtual systems, so it's not going to cost a lot of hardware, software, etc. to put it together, and then put it in and see if it solves the problem. You've got an identified problem. You simulate it right there, put the solution in, and figure out whether that actually solves that problem. And rethinking the procurement process, which focuses on onboarding innovation, is going to be very necessary because the attackers are innovating at a much faster rate. It's no longer a manual process. We can talk about incentives of bringing cybersecurity startups to Maryland, etc. The shared resources direction is amazing. I was very, very happy to say to hear about it, learn about it, and but the tech communities are not just what the state is doing for the local governments. There are local incubators, but they don't talk to each other. There are private and public incubators. So universities have public incubators, and there are private incubators but they need to interact, and they need to have the ability to showcase what they're working on, and they might also want direction on what to work on from the state perspective in cybersecurity and other technologies writ large. There is a missing piece there, or there is missing coordination there that can be very handy.
Let me just jump in for 1 second. We're about it. We've got one more speaker to go. Was this your last slide?
This is literally my second last slide.
Second to last slide. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that we've got follow-up conversations to have, both with the procurement folks, but also with the IT folks. I'd be happy to make those introductions. But can you quickly wrap up, and then we'll turn it over?
So just like this problem, we've been solving using AI to defend against attack using since 2017. So I had anticipated that AI would be used to attack. So we started a company here in Maryland to actually defend using AI. And what we've managed to do is make data self-aware, so that when you are attacking some data by modifying it, corrupting it, by trying to steal it, that the data itself can report back into the system that this is what's happening to it, so that you are now at the impact point and you are not chasing someone who's trying to get into your house. You just assume that the stuff is in your the attackers are in, but they cannot steal anything and walk out. So that neutralizing, training people, these things are not cost effective. And in terms of the last point that I would make from a policy perspective is that we have to have a policy here that allows people to fully own their data. So if me as a citizen, if I want my personalized data to be deleted, just like I could do with my medical information under HIPAA, I can probably, I should be able to go in and take an accountability of whoever's using my data, to ask them why this was being used, being able to delete it, and it's, if somebody's using my data to train AI, being able to retract the inferences if it included my PII. Those are my points around.
I couldn't agree with you more. And hopefully we'll pass comprehensive data privacy legislation this year in the state of Maryland. Ahmed, I could talk to you forever, but we've got one last pitch.
No, thank you very much for your time. And
if you can stick around, people might have questions, but if not, that's
yes, no, I'm happy to stay.
okay. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage Thomas McClellan. Thank you so much. Last in our lineup, but absolutely not least, we're definitely looking forward to hearing from you. Can you introduce your role and just a bit about Palo Alto, and then dive into the 3 questions?
No. Chair Pryhester, Chair Kazir, members of the committee, thank you very much for having me. My name's Thomas McClellan. I head up government affairs and strategy for Palo Alto Networks. We are the world's largest cybersecurity provider out there. We're the world's largest pure play cybersecurity provider. And obviously was asked today to talk about the intersection of AI and cybersecurity. And I know we're up against time, and so I will redact my comments as I go through.
Thomas, just for your awareness and for everybody else's, we're going to go until 1:10. So you don't have to speak at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I'll wait.
It's not generally my nature to not speak 1,000,000 miles an hour. I'm very excited about and passionate about this topic, but certainly artificial intelligence is central to our ability to protect our digital way of life. And what we're seeing is a tremendous development in technology, both on the good side and the bad side. And I know I won't even go over the 3 questions that I've been asked to talk about, but I will just begin to jump in on some of these things. The first is you asked about what are some of the evolving threats that we should be concerned about. And some of these have already been touched on, and I may just elucidate, but I won't go into great depth on any of those. The first, obviously, is the ability of the attackers to improve their tradecraft through social engineering attacks. Typically, the typical old school social engineering would have had typos or mistakes. Things would have been, didn't look perfect. AI is quickly changing that, and we're going to see an uptick, and are seeing an uptick in phishing attacks. The second is the notion of accelerating and scaling attack. And I'm going to share just a couple slides, if that's okay. So when you look at, one of the advantages that we have, one of the advantages that we have as our company is that our scale and size, we see a lot of things around the globe. And, we're seeing new objects, new attacks. But what's interesting, though, is on the bad side, every day, our company, we defend against 36 billion attacks. Of those, 1.5 million attacks are brand new. They're what are so-called zero-day attacks that haven't been seen. That's because of the use of AI on the attacker side to increase and scale up attacks in a way that's never been seen before. And this was touched on earlier, and it has to do with this notion of, so I'm going to really kind of 3 major threats that we should be concerned about. Social engineering attacks, accelerating and scaling attacks, new attacks. The last is this notion of the bad guys, the attackers, leveraging what's called attack surface management, or attack surface, to identify vulnerabilities and launch attacks. And so we call it ASM in the industry, attack surface management. And I think the notion about identifying vulnerabilities is a key component to any cybersecurity strategy on both, and I can talk more about how this gets leveraged, but in essence, attack surface management, for example, we have a tool it's called Expanse, and our tool scans the entire public-facing internet, like 99% of the public-facing internet. I think it's every 15 minutes or so. And we look at different organizations to see what vulnerabilities, what systems are outside their security stack, are unpatched, and so forth. And so we use AI to do that, machine learning to do that. But then we also use AI to help mitigate those attacks. We can identify vulnerabilities. We cannot identify those 0 days coming through by leveraging those attacks. And that's an important thing to know, that it's not just, it's there. When you leverage the tools appropriately, you are able to counter and close down these vulnerabilities in a relatively short amount of time. And one slide I'll get to talks a little bit about what's called mean time to respond. One of the other challenges facing states, and this is where AI comes in as exceptionally important, is that most organizations, in particular state organizations, have point products, point solutions that are deployed across their organizations, and that they're not necessarily able to manage all these kind of different point products, and even kind of have the people who do it. And one of the most scarce resources for any organization are the human resources out there. And this is where AI can help transform things. AI, and this is, I'll center most of my comments around this, and I know I'm going to be very, very cognizant of time, Senator. AI, an AI Security Operations Center is absolutely central to the success of any organization. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is, so I talked about attack surface management, and Senator, I believe you have these slides. But you see on the left, network, endpoint, identity, cloud, attack surface management, others. Those are all the telemetries that organizations have to manage, and you can't do it using people at this point. You can use people to help develop, design the systems, but to not run them. And that's important when you go back to this slide here. So for example, in our own Security Operations Center for Palo Alto, we get hit, we see 36 billion events every day. We winnow those down to just 8 manual attacks every day. So we use our own tools to help orchestrate, to automate, leveraging AI, leveraging machine learning. And let's be honest, let's be clear, in our Security Operations Center, we actually only have 8 analysts, and we are the world's largest cybersecurity company. We are constantly under attack, and these folks, work regular hours, and the only reason we're able to do that is because we leverage AI. And so this is technology. These are processes that are available for states and other organizations to adopt. And Greg and Mr. Greg Rogers in his comments talking about the Security Operations Center, what I'm hearing from Maryland really tracks very well with these kind of developments. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of automating is this attack surface management. So attack surface management, you identify the vulnerabilities, and then you leverage AI to remediate them in real time. And so that's something that Maryland can do. We actually do this, and I can talk about this publicly. We actually do this for the Department of Defense. And to give you an example, we asked them, how many endpoints do you think you have out there? And they said about 100 million. We worked our Expanse tool with them, and it turns out to be around 300 million. And so, and some of that data is out there publicly. And so when you begin to think about how you can leverage that power in Maryland to identify and remediate vulnerabilities, it is an incredibly powerful tool, especially when, again, the biggest challenge you have as an organization is people. So let's talk about, I'll give you 3 recommendations. One, ensure the adoption of AI within the systems. And it was, to hear Greg talk, the CISO for the state, talk about what they're doing. It's commendable. I would invite you, I invite Greg and anybody else who would be willing to come out and visit our Security Operations Center to see how we do it. So these are kind of like the 4 core tenets that we see. And this is, high level visibility. You need to know what's out there. That's attack surface management. That's, what's in the network, what's transiting the network. Relentless automation, how you take all those tools I described, how you make sure that they're automated so you don't have people doing things. You have technology doing technology problem, addressing technological problems. You need good analytics. This AI relies on lots and lots and lots of data and analytics to drive all that. And that's how we're able to get from 36 billion events, 1.5 zero-day attacks, 1.5 million zero-day attacks every day. And we only have to manually investigate 8. And then actionable intelligence. Having all these tools, it must be actionable. What you're getting from your SOC, what you're getting from your security folks, it must be actionable. It can't be like, it can't be there's an open port or there's an unprotected IoT device out there. It's what do we do about it? How do we turn it on? And you know, the mantra is we're using AI as we modernize, the attackers modernize as well. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry if I rushed a little bit, but there you go. Thank you, Senator.
That was absolutely perfect. I'd just like to invite Ahmed and Dave to turn on their cameras if you're there still. And I am so sorry that the sun is like hitting me straight in the face. So that's why you see this weird dot. I did have a couple of questions, but I just want to look and see if anybody else has questions first. Okay, so just Thomas, I was curious about the AI powered SOC. And when you say that, you know, Maryland seems like it's in line, do most states have AI powered SOCs? Or are we kind of using AI a little bit and we should be using it a whole lot more? Does anybody on the call know where Maryland stands currently?
I will not speak specifically to Maryland, but as I said, I have the opportunity to work across the entire country. I work with all 55 states, commonwealths, territories, cities, and so forth, counties. And it's a maturity model, Senator, that there are some that are adopting and utilizing those technologies very well, and there are some that are more nascent on their journey. And the one thing that an AI-powered SOC, and this is one of the comments I blew past and trying to stay in my time zone, is the notion that it's scalable. And so, you know, to hear Netta talk specifically about her role, and I don't know of any other role in the country that she does, and I met her about a month or a half ago at an NGA event. You can scale AI-empowered SOCs to support other organizations, whether that's different agencies, whether that's different cities and counties. I am seeing a trend in that direction, that counties and cities are working together, that states are beginning to figure out how they support local governments, state and local governments, K-12, infrastructure providers, leveraging AI-empowered SOCs to do the automation, to do the orchestration with limited human capital.
I mean, that seems like, since we have such a problem staffing, it seems like we would want to, you know, ramp up AI as much as possible to supplement the staff that we have and those that we don't have. I had a question also, Dave. I asked you briefly about how we operationalize the data privacy management. Do you have a quick answer, or should we take that offline? Or both? We can't hear you. I can't hear you, Dave. Try turning the mute on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry. I can talk to you a little bit about data governance today, is what I came prepared for. The data privacy is a little bit more nuanced, and I'd like to, unless you want me to focus on privacy, I'd like to table that.
Yes, no, that's fine. I think I meant the data governance. Was that what I asked previously?
You did. So
yeah, that's what.
Okay.
Can you just give us the quick answer now, and then I'll definitely follow up with you offline?
Sure. So data governance is going to, you're going to have to start with identification, right? So collecting an inventory of the types of data that are dispersed amongst the various agencies and centralizing that, like we talked about under the OSM, to then establish, okay, here's what we have, where we have it, and how we would like to classify it. And now, all right, how are we going to govern across how we need to operate our business to make sure that we provide confidentiality, integrity, and availability all at the same time? Those are the steps.
Great. And Ahmed, last but not least, I had a question about, I can't remember the exact quote. It was a fabulous quote though, about it, ensuring that a procurement process allowed for innovation. Like,
Yes.
it seems like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you can speak from your own personal experience, but I mean, there's so much help the state needs in procurement right now. Do you have anything actionable like we could do to try to make sure that we're not missing out on working with these new startups? Like, maybe what would be the first step in like a pilot with a small company before we procure?
Very simple. If for example, the CISO's office or the data privacy officer's office, if you have, let's take data labeling as an example. Like you want to be able to figure out if you have a reasonable data labeling solution that you can apply to automate that process. Having that simulated in an environment on GovCloud or on regular cloud or in a bunch of virtual machines inside a control office, so that you can test out how does the technology actually behave and perform, and how the way you envision to see it, and just having that evaluation be available so that you can run a very rapid proof of concept where the technology providers are in partnership with the state, so it doesn't really cost state a lot of money, and you don't actually have to it shouldn't cost state a lot of time. So it's not like you're bringing something in and putting it in production where eventually it's going to be used. You just want to make sure that this thing is actually going to work, just in the concept that it's trying to prove to you.
For example, we could, like, if we took like Howard County Public School System.
Yes.
And we wanted to do just one school system.
Exactly. But you wouldn't even say you take Howard County School System or Montgomery County School System and you just want to do a single school system. What you would do is say, okay, let's take an average school, anonymize their data, put it in our test lab, right? And spin up the servers and the workstations that are there in this virtual environment, and say, okay, we now want to simulate attacks on this school, because you don't want to attack an actual school system. You want to attack a virtual school system, and then say, I'm going to see if this cybersecurity solution protects it. Or you want to say, okay, I want to see, I want to be able to track student activity inside the network, and I want to be able to say, okay, how much will it benefit teachers to adopt this new educational technology? Mm-hmm. What are the implications of that? You just have that in that sandbox, and so that you're not interrupting something else, and you're not but you're getting to the meat of the problem very quickly, and saying, okay, does it actually do the thing that the vendor is claiming that it does? And then use that to jump to the next stage. You don't want to discover that it doesn't work after spending a year in procuring it, and then finding out, oh, it doesn't work, or it's too late, or whatever the situation may be.
I think we have to really dig into this, because the way the procurement laws are set up, I mean, I think, DoIT's even reluctant to talk to vendors before the RFP goes out. So it's unfortunately overly complicated.
But it doesn't have to be.
There's a way to solve that.
Hold on. Let's give Thomas a
yes.
And I saw Dave's hand up also.
So sure. I was actually going to take this a different way, and you talk about Howard County Schools, which is near and dear to my heart.
I wasn't complaining about them. I just that's
no, I know it was illustrative, but one way I think the policymakers can help support what we're talking about here is creating vehicles through legislation that allow organizations to band together to purchase services at scale. So, for example, we in Oregon, where they've just passed the Center of Excellence, the Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which is going to be a central repository. No, it's going to do two things essentially. One is help train the workforce. Two, it's going to eventually broker services out to local municipal governments, K-12 provider, K-12 schools, and critical infrastructure providers. That type of structure is essential. However the procurement process works, I know it's a little bit off topic what you were talking about, but creating those types of processes through legislative structures allows organizations to work in ways that may have been prohibited through legislation, through regulation, through procurement rules and laws. So that's just an example of, I think, one way that you can deal with what you're talking about, how you get, Howard County and Baltimore City schools to all work together to buy the same thing that is through AI that they can scale up.
Right. No, that's a great idea. And I love more information, the Oregon Center of Excellence. I think to some extent we do that through the Maryland Association of Boards of Education. I know there's actually a call going on right now about working together to buy cybersecurity insurance. So but I'd love to see that Oregon Center of Excellence. Thank you, Thomas. Dave.
Yeah, great topic. Again, it might require some poking and prodding depending on the procurement laws, but what I have seen work effectively is actually using systems integrators to do bake-offs. So low cost, short run, upfront established KPIs or anticipated outcomes of how you're going to evaluate a specific technology, and then go get a limited set of non-production licenses. A lot of times our friends Palo Alto and others will actually enable people with non-production licenses, and then use systems integrators to do bake-offs and build those test labs so that you're not absorbing state resources and time and effort and money, but using that as a way to make informed decisions, especially at scale, and how things will adapt to various agencies and their various requirements. It's a great methodology to look to implement.
Fabulous. And were you saying bake-off?
Bake-off, yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, technology bake-offs. Which one's better? Which one meets my flavor palette the best based on what I need it to do?
Awesome. Well, thank you guys all so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I know that there's not quite as many people here as there were originally, but I do know that these hearings are watched, repeatedly by folks, and I've got lots of people, texting me right now. So we're being watched online too. And I just want to thank you. For the good of anybody still, watching, I just want to thank, we had an amazing lineup. I think my big takeaways are that we've actually come a long way in a few years when we look at cybersecurity and information technology, and we're on the learning curve on AI. We've got a long way to go as well. And as I always say, cybersecurity is a team sport. It's going to take the government in collaboration with our private sector friends and our not-for-profit folks to really come up with that whole estate approach. So lots more to do. Thank you all for your time, and we will be looking forward to some of those follow-up conversations and follow-up questions in the near future.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senators. This was amazing. Good to learn all the
Thank you so
things
much.
that are happening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.